Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Knock at the Door. Clint Harrison pulled into his driveway at 6:47 p.m., the familiar weight of exhaustion settling into his shoulders. 12 years as a federal prosecutor had taught him to compartmentalize, but some days the darkness of his cases followed him home like smoke clinging to his clothes. The suburban neighborhood of Maple Ridge was his sanctuary. Quiet streets lined with oak trees and the kind of normalcy that felt precious after spending days in courtrooms prosecuting the worst of humanity. He noticed the patrol car immediately. It sat in front of his house like a black and white omen, its presence disrupting the peaceful evening rhythm of his street. Clint's prosecutor instincts kicked in, cataloging details. Local police, not federal. Single officer. Engine off, suggesting they'd been waiting. Officer Bradley Hutchins stepped out as Clint approached his front door. Clint recognized him. They'd worked together on a few cases where federal and local jurisdictions overlapped. Hutchins was a good cop, methodical and honest, which made his presence here all the more concerning. "Evening, Mr. Harrison," Hutchins said, his voice carrying the weight of uncomfortable news. "Sorry to bother you at home." "What's going on, Bradley?" Clint set down his briefcase, keys still in hand. "We took your son into custody for stealing." The words hit Clint like a physical blow. His keys slipped from his fingers, clattering against the concrete. For a moment, the world tilted sideways, and he gripped the doorframe to steady himself. "My son died 7 years ago." The certainty in his own voice surprised him. 7 years, 3 months, and 16 days since Chad's funeral. 7 years since he'd buried his 12-year-old boy after the car accident that had also taken his wife, Amelia. 7 years of therapy, of rebuilding his life piece by piece, of learning to function with a hole in his chest that never quite healed. Officer Hutchins's face went pale. "Sir, there must be some mistake. The boy gave your name and address. Said he was Chad Harrison." Clint's mind raced through possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. Identity theft involving a dead child, someone playing a sick joke, or something worse, something that connected to the dozens of criminals he'd put behind bars over the years. Where is he now? Clint's voice was steady despite the chaos in his head. "At the station. Mr. Harrison, I think you should come with me." The ride to the precinct passed in a blur of streetlights and unanswered questions. Clint had built his career on facts, on evidence, on the immutable truth that could be proven in a court of law. But nothing in his experience had prepared him for this moment. The Jefferson County Police Station buzzed with its usual evening activity. Phones ringing, officers filing reports, the controlled chaos of law enforcement. Hutchins led Clint through the familiar hallways to the juvenile holding area. Through a reinforced glass window, Clint saw him. The boy sat alone in a sterile waiting room, his dark hair falling across his forehead in a way that made Clint's breath catch. He was maybe 19 now, with the lean build of someone who'd grown up too fast. But the eyes, those were Chad's eyes. The same deep brown that Amelia used to say came from her side of the family. The boy looked up, and their gazes met through the glass. Recognition flickered across his face, followed by something that looked like relief mixed with fear. "Dad!" The word came through the intercom system, distorted by static but unmistakable. Clint felt his legs give out slightly, and he grabbed the nearest chair for support. It wasn't possible. He'd identified Chad's body himself. He'd buried his son in Greenwood Cemetery under a headstone that read, "Beloved son and light of our lives." He'd spent 7 years in grief counseling, working through the survivor's guilt and the crushing loneliness. But the boy in that room had Chad's eyes, Chad's voice, even the same nervous habit of running his fingers through his hair when he was scared. "I need to talk to him," Clint said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Harrison," Hutchins said carefully, "maybe we should run some tests first. DNA, fingerprints." Now, the authority in Clint's voice was absolute. "I need to talk to him now." As they walked toward the interview room, Clint's mind shifted into the analytical mode that had made him one of the most successful federal prosecutors in the state. Someone was playing a game here, and they'd chosen to use the deepest wound in his life as their weapon. The question was why, and more importantly, who? The boy, who looked so much like Chad that it was physically painful to look at him, stood when Clint entered the room. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. He was taller now, broader in the shoulders, but the bone structure was unmistakably familiar. "Dad, I know this is crazy, but—" "Sit down," Clint interrupted, his prosecutor voice cutting through the emotion. "What's your name?" "Chad Harrison. I'm your son. My son is dead. I buried him 7 years ago." The boy's face crumpled. "No, Dad, listen to me. The accident. I wasn't in the car. I was supposed to be, but I wasn't. Someone took me before." "Stop." Clint held up a hand. Every instinct he'd honed over years of interrogating liars was screaming that this was impossible. But another part of him, the part that had never fully accepted his son's death, was listening. "Tell me about the scar on Chad's left knee." The boy didn't hesitate. "From when I fell off my bike when I was 8. You said I was trying to keep up with the big kids, and I went too fast down Cemetery Hill. Mom put dinosaur Band-Aids on it." Clint's world tilted again. Nobody knew about those Band-Aids. It wasn't in any medical record or police report. It was just a memory shared between a father, mother, and son on a sunny afternoon that felt like a lifetime ago. The night before the accident, Clint said slowly, "What did we talk about?" "Baseball tryouts. I was nervous about making the team. You told me that being nervous meant I cared, and caring was the first step to being great at something." The boy's voice broke. "You said we'd practice in the backyard when you got home from your case in Chicago." Clint had to grip the edge of the table. He'd never told anyone about that conversation. Not the police, not the therapists, not even Amelia's sister during the dark months after the funeral. But this was impossible. He'd seen the bodies. He'd identified them both. "The theft charge," Clint said, forcing himself to think like a prosecutor. "What did you steal?" "Food. From a convenience store." The shame in the boy's voice was real. "I haven't eaten in 2 days. I've been trying to get home, but I didn't have any money and—" "Get home from where?" "I don't know exactly. Somewhere upstate. They kept me in different places over the years." The boy leaned forward. "Dad, I know how this sounds, but I've been trying to escape for 7 years. I finally made it, and I came straight here. The people who took me. I don't know all their names, but the man in charge, he hates you. Really hates you. He said this was all about making you pay for what you did to his family." The room went silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights. Clint felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Over the years, he'd prosecuted dozens of cases involving kidnapping, organized crime, and domestic terrorism. He'd sent people to prison who had resources, connections, and most importantly, reasons to want revenge. "Describe him," Clint said. "Tall, maybe your age. Silver hair, but not old silver, like it went gray early. Expensive clothes. He always smelled like some kind of cologne that made my eyes water." The boy paused. "He had a scar here." He traced a line from his left ear to the corner of his mouth. "And he called me insurance sometimes." Clint's blood turned to ice. He knew that scar. He'd put it there 15 years ago during the arrest of Vincent Mays, a human trafficking kingpin who'd built an empire moving children across state lines. Mays had fought like a wild animal when they'd finally cornered him, and a piece of broken glass had caught his face during the struggle. Vincent Mays, who'd sworn during his sentencing that he'd make Clint understand what it felt like to lose everything. Vincent Mays, who'd been released from federal prison just over 2 years ago after serving his minimum sentence. Vincent Mays, who had apparently made good on his promise. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity. If Chad was alive, if he'd been taken instead of killed, then everything Clint thought he knew about the worst day of his life was a lie. "How did you escape?" Clint asked. "There was a fire at the house where they were keeping me. Everyone was focused on that, and I managed to slip away." The boy looked down at his hands. "I've been walking and hitchhiking for 3 weeks, trying to get home. I remembered our address, but when I got here, the house was different, had different people living in it." Clint nodded. He'd sold the family home 2 years after the accident, unable to bear the memories. He'd moved to a smaller place across town, somewhere without ghosts in every room. "The house on Elm Street," he said. "You went to our old house." "Yeah." The lady who answered the door called the police when I tried to explain who I was. Everything fit. It was insane, impossible, but it fit. The question now was what to do about it. If Vincent Mays had orchestrated this elaborate deception, if he'd somehow faked Chad's death and kept him prisoner for 7 years, then this wasn't just about revenge. It was about the long game. Mays was planning something bigger. This was just the opening move. Chapter 2. Echoes of the Past. The DNA test would take 72 hours. 3 days that stretched before Clint like an eternity, filled with questions that multiplied faster than he could process them. He'd arranged for temporary custody of the boy. He couldn't bring himself to call him Chad yet, not until he knew for certain, and brought him to his current house on Millbrook Drive. The boy stood in the living room, taking in the space with the careful attention of someone who'd learned to catalog escape routes and potential threats. It broke Clint's heart and made him proud in equal measure. Chad had always been observant, but this was different. This was survival. "It's smaller than our old place," the boy said. "I didn't need as much space anymore." Clint watched him carefully. "Are you hungry?" The nod was almost imperceptible, but Clint caught it. He'd become an expert at reading people during his years as a prosecutor, and everything about this young man screamed of someone who'd learned not to ask for things, not to show weakness. While he prepared sandwiches in the kitchen, Clint's mind worked through the implications. If this was really Chad, then Vincent Mays had committed the perfect crime. He'd made a father bury his own son while keeping that same son as a living weapon to be used years later. But why wait 7 years? Why release Chad now? The answer came to him as he set the food on the table. Mays had been in prison for 13 years. He'd gotten out 2 years ago, which meant he'd spent time planning, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. The timing wasn't random, it was strategic. "Tell me about where they kept you," Clint said as the boy devoured his sandwich. "Different places. Never the same one for more than a few months. Sometimes it was a house in the suburbs, sometimes a cabin in the woods. Once, it was an apartment above a restaurant in some city." He paused, chewing thoughtfully. "They homeschooled me, made sure I could read and write and do math. But they never let me have friends or go anywhere alone." "Did they hurt you?" The question hung in the air. The boy's hand paused halfway to his mouth, and Clint saw something flicker behind his eyes, a darkness that no 19-year-old should carry. "Not physically, not usually." His voice was quiet. "But they made sure I knew what would happen if I tried to escape. They showed me pictures of other kids who tried to run. Said they'd do the same to me, and then they'd come for you." Rage burned in Clint's chest, white-hot and consuming. He'd spent his career fighting people like Vincent Mays, but this was personal. This was his son, if it was his son, describing 7 years of psychological torture. "They talked about me. All the time. Mays especially. He said you destroyed his family, sent him to prison while his wife and daughter suffered. Said his daughter killed herself while he was locked up, and it was your fault." Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Clint remembered the Mays case in detail. It had been one of his biggest wins early in his career. Vincent Mays had been trafficking children through a network of safe houses across the Midwest. The investigation had taken 2 years and had ultimately rescued 37 children from situations ranging from forced labor to worse. Mays's wife, Delia, had been arrested as an accessory. She'd committed suicide in county jail while awaiting trial. Their teenage daughter, Morgan, had been placed in foster care and had taken her own life 6 months later. Clint had never felt guilt about prosecuting that case. The Mays operation had been a horror show, and Vincent Mays had deserved every year of his sentence. But he could understand how a man might blame the prosecutor rather than face his own responsibility for his family's destruction. "He's going to come for me," the boy said quietly. "That's why he let me escape. He wants you to find me, to get attached again. Then he's going to take me away, and this time you'll know I'm alive while he kills me." The clinical way he said it chilled Clint to the bone. This young man had spent 7 years thinking like a prisoner, analyzing his captor's motivations and planning for the worst-case scenarios. No one's going to take you anywhere, Clint said with absolute conviction. I won't let that happen. You couldn't stop it before. The words were delivered without malice, just simple fact. And they hit Clint harder than any cross-examination he'd ever endured. Tell me about the accident, he said. What you remember from that day. The boy set down his sandwich and leaned back in his chair. I was supposed to go with you and Mom to the store. But I got a call on the house phone, someone saying they were from the school, that I'd left my backpack and needed to come get it for a project due Monday. You guys left without me. Said you'd be back in an hour. Clint's memory of that day was crystal clear. Chad had been excited about going with them because they'd promised to stop for ice cream. But at the last minute, he'd gotten that phone call and begged off. Amelia had been irritated. She'd suspected Chad was making excuses to stay home and play video games. What happened after we left? I walked to school, but when I got there, no one knew anything about a backpack or a phone call. I was walking home when a van pulled up. Two men got out and grabbed me. His voice remained steady, but Clint could see the cost of maintaining that composure. They had a picture of our family. Knew your name, where you worked, what cases you were handling. They said if I screamed or tried to run, they'd kill you and Mom. So you went with them. I was 12, Dad. They were adults with guns, and they knew everything about us. What choice did I have? None, Clint realized. A 12-year-old boy faced with that situation would do exactly what Chad had done. Try to protect his parents by complying with his kidnappers. The phone call to the house, Clint said. They made that call to get you alone. Yeah, and while I was gone, they staged the accident. The implications of that statement hit Clint like a sledgehammer. Staged it how? They had bodies. A woman and a child, both burned beyond recognition in the car wreck. I heard them talking about it later, how easy it was to fool the police and the medical examiner when the bodies were damaged enough. Clint felt sick. The accident had been a drunk driver running a red light, or so the police report had stated. The other driver had died too, along with his passenger. But if Mays had orchestrated the whole thing, the drunk driver, Clint said, did they say anything about him? He wasn't drunk. He was one of theirs. They drugged him and put him behind the wheel, then remote-controlled the crash. The boy's matter-of-fact delivery made it even more horrifying. They said it was important that you believe we were really dead. That way you'd stop looking for us, and they could take their time with the revenge. 7 years. 7 years of believing his family was dead while his son was being held prisoner by a madman planning an elaborate revenge scheme. 7 years of grief and guilt and slowly rebuilding his life, all while the target was painted on his back, getting bigger and brighter. Clint's phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. Hello, Clint. I trust you've been reunited with your boy by now. We have so much to catch up on. V. A second message followed immediately. Tomorrow, 8 p.m. Warehouse District, 1247, Industrial Boulevard. Come alone, or this reunion will be even shorter than the last one. Clint showed the messages to the boy, whose face went pale. He's watching us, the boy said. He always said he had people everywhere, that he'd know if I ever made contact with you. It's okay, Clint said, though his mind was already racing through possibilities. This is what he wants, to draw me out. But he's made a mistake. What mistake? He's given me time to prepare, and he's underestimated how much I've learned about fighting people like him over the past 7 years. The boy looked skeptical. Dad, these aren't just criminals. They're organized, they're smart, and they've been planning this for years. What makes you think you can beat them? Clint smiled, and for the first time since the police officer had knocked on his door, he felt like himself again. Not the grieving father or the broken man, but the federal prosecutor who'd built his career on taking down the worst monster society had to offer. Because for 7 years, I've been prosecuting cases just like this one. I've learned every trick, every weakness, every way these operations fall apart. He met the boy's eyes. And because this time, it's personal. Chapter 3, The Hunter Becomes the Hunted. Clint spent the night making phone calls and pulling favors accumulated over a decade and a half in federal law enforcement. By sunrise, he had a complete dossier on Vincent Mays' activities since his release from prison, courtesy of Detective Maria Santos from the FBI's Organized Crime Task Force. The picture that emerged was troubling. Mays had been keeping a low profile, working as a consultant for various legitimate businesses while carefully rebuilding his network. He'd purchased property in 3 states, all through shell companies that were just legal enough to avoid immediate scrutiny. Most concerning, he'd been recruiting young men with criminal records, no family ties, and nothing left to lose. He's building something, Santos had told him during their early morning phone call. We've been watching him, but everything he's doing is technically legal. He's learned from his mistakes. The boy, Clint, was starting to think of him as Chad again, despite the lack of DNA confirmation. Woke up screaming from a nightmare at 6 a.m. Clint found him sitting on the edge of the guest bed, shaking and covered in sweat. "It's okay," Clint said, sitting beside him. "You're safe. I dreamed they found me, that they dragged me back to that place." Chad wiped his face with the back of his hand. 7 years of that. Every night, the same fear. "Tell me about the place you escaped from." Chad described a compound in rural upstate New York. Multiple buildings surrounded by an electric fence, isolated enough that screaming wouldn't bring help. It sounded like a military installation, which made sense. Mays had served in Army Special Forces before turning to crime, and he'd retained that tactical mindset. How many people were there? Maybe 20, but they rotated in and out, so I never saw everyone at once. Chad paused. There were other kids sometimes, younger ones. They never stayed long. Clint felt that familiar rage building again. Mays hadn't just kidnapped his son. He'd been continuing his trafficking operation, just more carefully than before. "Chad, I need you to tell me everything you can remember about the layout of that compound. Every building, every fence, every security measure." For the next 2 hours, Chad drew detailed maps of the facility, describing guard rotations, electronic surveillance, and the daily routines of the people who'd held him prisoner. His memory was remarkable, sharpened by years of survival instinct and the desperate hope that someday this information might help him escape. "You're not going there," Chad said as Clint studied the drawings. "That's what he wants. He's using me as bait to get you somewhere he controls." "I know. That's why we're not playing his game." Clint had learned long ago that the best way to defeat a chess master was to refuse to play chess. Instead of walking into Mays' trap at the warehouse, he was going to force Mays to come to him on terms he couldn't control. At 3 p.m., Clint received another text message. 6 hours, Clint. Don't disappoint me." He responded immediately. "Change of plans. If you want to talk, come to the Federal Building downtown. I'll be in my office until midnight." The response was immediate. "That's not how this works. It is now. You have something I want back. I have something you want. Revenge against the man who destroyed your life. But if you want it, you come to me." No response came for 3 hours. Then, at 6:30 p.m., Clint's office phone rang. "You always were arrogant." Vincent Mays' voice was exactly as Clint remembered, smooth, educated, with just a hint of menace underneath the civilized surface. "I prefer thorough. Are you coming? Or are we done here? You think you're safe in your federal building with all your security guards and cameras? I think I'm a federal prosecutor who spent the last 7 years learning how to destroy people like you. I think I've got enough evidence to put you away for life, and I think you know it." There was a long pause. "What evidence?" "Kidnapping across state lines. Human trafficking. Multiple counts of murder in the staged accident. And that's just what I can prove tonight. Give me a week, and I'll have enough to ask for the death penalty. You can't prove any of that without your boy's testimony. And who's going to believe a traumatized kid who's been gone for 7 years? The same jury that's going to see the DNA evidence proving he's my son. The same jury that's going to hear testimony from the other victims you've trafficked since getting out of prison." Clint smiled, knowing Mays couldn't see it, but hoping he could hear it in his voice. "Did you really think the FBI stopped watching you the day you got out?" Another long pause. "Federal building. Midnight. Just you and me. And my son. He's not leaving my sight again." "Fine. But Clint, when this is over, you're going to understand exactly what I felt when my family died. You're going to live with that pain for the rest of your very short life." The line went dead. Clint immediately called Detective Santos. "He's coming. Midnight, Federal Building. We'll be ready. How do you want to play this? By the book. I want everything recorded, everything documented. When this is over, I want a case so airtight that his own lawyer will recommend he plead guilty. But as Clint hung up the phone, he realized that legal justice wasn't enough. Vincent Mays had stolen 7 years of his son's life, 7 years of watching him grow up, 7 years of being a father. There were some crimes that the law couldn't adequately punish. Fortunately, Clint had learned a few things about justice that couldn't be found in law books. At 11:45 p.m., Clint and Chad sat in conference room 3B on the 7th floor of the federal building. The room was equipped with the latest surveillance technology, and Detective Santos' team was positioned throughout the building. If Mays tried anything violent, he'd be stopped before he could act. But Clint suspected that wasn't Mays' plan. This was a psychological game, and the real battle would be fought with words and wills rather than weapons. At exactly midnight, Vincent Mays walked into the conference room. He looked older than his 53 years, his silver hair now completely white and his face lined with the kind of deep creases that came from chronic anger. The scar that ran from his ear to his mouth was more prominent now, a jagged reminder of the day his empire had fallen. But his eyes were the same, cold, calculating, and utterly without conscience. "Hello, Clint. You look good for a man who's buried his family twice." "Vincent," Clint kept his voice level. "You look like exactly what you are, a broken old man clinging to fantasies of revenge." Mays' attention shifted to Chad, and his smile turned predatory. "And there's my insurance policy. You've grown up, boy. I barely recognize you without the fear in your eyes." Chad met his gaze steadily. "The fear's still there. I just learned not to show it to monsters." "Monsters?" Mays laughed. "I fed you, housed you, educated you. I kept you alive when I could have killed you 100 times over. If I'm a monster, what does that make your father?" "The man who's going to put you back in prison for the rest of your life," Chad said. "No, I don't think so." Mays turned back to Clint. "See, there's something you don't know yet. Something that's going to change everything." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick manila envelope, placing it on the table between them. "Go ahead," he said. "Open it." Clint hesitated, then picked up the envelope. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, pictures of Chad over the years, but not the prison-like conditions he described. These showed a comfortable house, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, family dinners. And in every picture, Chad was smiling. Confused, Mays asked, "Let me help you understand. Your son wasn't my prisoner, Clint. He was my adopted son. I gave him everything you never could: stability, security, a family that actually cared about him." "That's not true," Chad said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it? Tell your father about Sarah. Tell him about the little sister you never mentioned." Chad's face went pale. "She's not my sister. Sarah Mays, 12 years old, adopted the same day I took you in. She's been your family for 7 years." Mays smiled. "Tell him about how you taught her to ride a bike. Tell him about the bedtime stories you used to read to her." Clint watched his son's face crumble, and he realized that Vincent Mays had played a game more complex and cruel than he'd imagined. He hadn't just stolen Chad. He made him complicit in his own captivity by giving him someone to love and protect. "Where is she now?" Chad whispered. "Safe. For now. But that depends entirely on what happens next." The trap was revealed in all its elegant brutality. Mays had spent 7 years not just holding Chad prisoner, but creating a new family dynamic that made escape emotionally impossible. Chad hadn't just been a captive. He'd been a brother, a protector, a son to people who depended on him. "Here's what's going to happen," Mays continued. "Your boy is going to come home with me, voluntarily, because he knows that if he doesn't, little Sarah is going to pay the price for his selfishness." "No," Clint said. "We'll find her. We'll get her somewhere safe." "With what evidence?" "You can't even prove I kidnapped your son. These pictures show a happy family. My word against his, and I'm a reformed ex-convict who opened his home to a troubled child." The photographs told a different story than the one Chad had described. They showed birthday parties and family vacations, homework sessions, and movie nights. To an outside observer, they would look like evidence of a loving home rather than an elaborate prison. "You're sick," Clint said. "I'm thorough, just like you taught me to be during my trial." May stood up. "You have 24 hours to decide. Your son comes with me willingly, or Sarah dies. And then we start over with a new game. He walked to the door, then paused. Oh, and Clint? Don't bother trying to find her. I've had 7 years to perfect my methods. This time, there won't be any dramatic escapes or last-minute rescues. As the door closed behind him, Clint realized that everything he thought he'd understood about this situation was wrong. Vincent Mays hadn't just kidnapped his son. He'd weaponized his compassion, turning Chad's protective instincts in chains that bound him more effectively than any prison. The real battle was just beginning. Chapter 4. The Weight of Truth. The federal building felt like a tomb in the hours after midnight. Clint and Chad sat in the conference room, surrounded by empty coffee cups and legal documents that suddenly seemed meaningless. The photographs Mays had left behind were spread across the table like evidence of a life Clint had never known existed. Chad hadn't spoken since Mays left. He stared at a picture of himself helping a young girl blow out candles on a birthday cake. Both of them laughing, genuinely happy. The image was a knife twist in everything he'd told his father about his captivity. Tell me about Sarah, Clint said gently. She was 8 when they brought her to the house. Scared, crying for her real parents who died in a car accident. Chad's voice was hollow. May said she needed someone to look after her, and I was the oldest kid there. So you became her big brother. I tried to protect her from the bad stuff. Made sure she had food when the adults forgot to feed us. Read her stories when she had nightmares. Chad picked up another photograph, this one showing him pushing a small girl on a swing set. She called me Chad because she couldn't pronounce my whole name when she was little. Clint felt something break inside his chest. His son had spent 7 years not just surviving, but becoming a parent figure to a child who needed protection. The boy who'd been kidnapped at 12 had grown into a young man who understood responsibility and sacrifice in ways that most adults never would. That's why you couldn't escape before now. Every time I planned to run, I'd think about what they'd do to her. And there were always other kids coming and going. If I left, who would make sure they were okay? The true cruelty of Mays's plan became clear. He'd turned Chad's best qualities, his compassion, his protective instincts, his sense of responsibility, into prison bars. Every escape attempt would feel like abandoning vulnerable children. The fire you mentioned, Clint said. What really happened? Chad was quiet for a long moment. Sarah started it. She found some matches and was playing with them in her room. I tried to put it out, but it spread too fast. His voice broke. In all the chaos, I saw my chance to run. And I took it. I left her there, to save her life and yours. You came to find help. I came because I'm a coward. Because I finally chose myself over her. And now she's going to die because of it. Clint reached across the table and gripped his son's hand. You came because you're brave. Because you knew that getting help was the only way to save her and all the other children. Is it? Because it feels like I just handed Mays the perfect weapon to use against us. Before Clint could answer, Detective Santos entered the room with a tablet in her hands. I'm sorry to interrupt, but you need to see this. The tablet displayed a live video feed. In it, a young girl with dark hair and solemn eyes sat on a simple bed in what looked like a dormitory-style room. She was reading a book, seemingly calm and unaware that she was being watched. This was uploaded to a secure server 20 minutes ago, Santos said. No location data, bounced through multiple proxies. But it's definitely live. Watch the timestamp. As they watched, the girl looked up from her book and waved at the camera. Hi, Chad. I hope you're okay. Mr. Vincent says you want to find your real dad, and that's good. I'm not scared. I know you'll come back for me when it's safe. The feed cut off. Chad was on his feet, pacing the small room like a caged animal. She doesn't understand. She thinks this is just another one of his games. What kind of games? Clint asked. He used to test us, put us in situations where we had to choose between our own safety and someone else's. Said he was teaching us about the real world, about how people always choose themselves when it matters. But you never did. No. And that's why he kept me around. I was his proof that he could create better people than nature did. Better than you did. Clint's phone buzzed with a text message. Touching reunion, isn't it? 23 hours and counting. V. He's watching us, Clint said. Santos nodded. We've swept the building twice. No bugs, No cameras. He's probably using long-range surveillance from one of the buildings across the street. Or he has someone inside the federal building, Chad said. He told me once that he had people everywhere. Judges, cops, lawyers. Said that's how he stayed ahead of the law for so long. The thought sent a chill through Clint. If Mays had a source inside federal law enforcement, then everything they discussed tonight might already be compromised. Every plan they made, every move they considered, could be known to their enemy before they acted on it. We need to assume he's listening, Clint said. From now on, everything sensitive happens off-site and offline. Santos agreed. I'll arrange a safe house, somewhere we can work without worrying about surveillance. But as they prepared to leave the federal building, Clint realized that changing locations wouldn't solve their fundamental problem. They had less than 24 hours to find a 12-year-old girl who could be anywhere in the country, hidden by a man who'd spent 7 years perfecting his methods. The clock was ticking, and Vincent Mays held all the cards. At 3 a.m., they regrouped in a nondescript motel room on the outskirts of town. Santos had brought a team of 3 other agents, all people she trusted completely. The room was swept for surveillance devices and declared clean. Let's start with what we know, Santos said, spreading maps and documents across the 2 double beds. Mays owns or controls property in New York, Pennsylvania, and Ohio, all purchased through shell companies, all isolated enough for his purposes. The compound Chad escaped from, Clint said. That's in New York? Chad nodded. But he won't take her there. It's compromised now. He'll have moved everyone to a backup location. Tell us about the backup locations. I only saw 2 others. One was a cabin in Pennsylvania, but it was small, maybe room for 5 or 6 people. The other was an old summer camp in Ohio. That one was bigger, more permanent. Santos marked the locations on her map. We can have teams at both places within 6 hours. And if she's not at either one? Chad asked. Then we're running out of time and options, Santos admitted. Clint studied the map, looking for patterns. Mays's properties formed a rough triangle across 3 states, each location approximately 4 hours' drive from the others. It was a smart setup, close enough to move people and resources quickly, far enough apart to make coordinated raids difficult. He's not going to make this easy, Clint said. Mays is too smart to put Sarah somewhere we can find her. This whole thing is psychological warfare. So what's his endgame? Santos asked. He wants Chad to choose him over me, to prove that the family he created is stronger than the one Chad was born into. Clint looked at his son. The question is, what are we willing to do to save Sarah? Chad met his eyes. Whatever it takes, even if it means going back to him, if that's the only way to save her, yes. No. Clint's voice was absolute. We're not sacrificing you to save her. There has to be another way. What if there isn't? The question hung in the air, unanswered. Outside the motel window, dawn was beginning to break over a world that felt fundamentally changed from the one Clint had known just 24 hours earlier. He'd gotten his son back only to discover that saving him might require losing him again. But Vincent Mays had made one crucial mistake in his elaborate revenge scheme. He'd underestimated the man Clint had become during 7 years of believing his family was dead. The grieving father might have been willing to make deals and accept compromises. The prosecutor who'd spent those same 7 years learning to think like the monsters he hunted was not. Chapter 5. The Network Unravels. Dawn brought a break in the case that nobody had expected. Detective Santos burst into the motel room at 7 a.m. with news that changed everything. We found him, she announced. Or rather, he found us. She pulled out her phone and played a voicemail message. The voice was young, male, and terrified. This is Tyler Mays. I'm Vincent Mays's nephew. I have information about the girl you're looking for, but I can't talk long. They don't know I'm calling. Meet me at the Riverside Diner on Highway 52 in 1 hour. Come alone, or I disappear. Mays has a nephew. Clint asked. Tyler Mays, 22 years old. His father was Vincent's younger brother. Died in Iraq when Tyler was 15. The kid's been in and out of trouble since then, but nothing major. Petty theft, drug possession, minor assault charges. Chad looked up from the maps he'd been studying. I know him. He was at the compound sometimes. Never stayed long, and Vincent didn't trust him with important stuff. But he was decent to the younger kids. Could be a trap, Santos warned. Could be our only chance, Clint replied. The Riverside Diner was the kind of place that existed in every small town across America. Worn vinyl booze, fluorescent lighting, and coffee that had been brewing since the Carter administration. Tyler Mays sat in a corner booth, his leg bouncing nervously under the table. He looked like a younger version of his uncle. But where Vincent's face showed calculated cruelty, Tyler showed exhaustion and guilt. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't slept, and his hands shook slightly as he lifted his coffee cup. "You came," he said as Clint slid into the booth across from him. "You said you have information about Sarah." "Yeah, but first you need to understand something. I never wanted any part of this. Vincent took me in after my dad died, and I owed him. But what he's doing to that little girl, to all those kids..." Tyler shook his head. "It's wrong. Even I can see that. Where is she?" "Safe. For now. But Vincent's planning something bad for tonight. He's moving everyone to a new location, and after that, you'll never find her." "What kind of new location?" Tyler pulled out a napkin and sketched a rough map. "There's an old mine shaft about 2 hours north of here. He's been preparing it for months, turning it into a fortress. Once they're underground, you need an army to get them out." Clint studied the crew drawing. "Why are you helping us?" "Because I've got a sister, too." "Had a sister. She died of an overdose 3 years ago while I was running errands for Vincent." Tyler's voice broke. "I told myself I was protecting her by staying away, but really I was just protecting myself. I won't make that mistake again." "What does Vincent want you to do?" "I'm supposed to grab the kid, your son, tonight when he comes back. Vincent thinks he can break Chad by making him watch what happens to Sarah." Tyler met Clint's eyes. He's not just planning to kill her. He's planning to make it hurt. The conversation was interrupted by Tyler's phone buzzing. He glanced at the screen and went pale. "I have to go. Vincent's wondering where I am." He stood up, then paused. "There's something else. Vincent's not working alone anymore. He's got backing from someone with serious money and connections. Someone who wants you dead almost as much as he does." "Who?" "I don't know. But whoever it is, they've been planning this for a long time. The mine shaft, the safe houses, the whole operation, it's too expensive for Vincent to finance on his own." Tyler left the diner quickly, leaving Clint with more questions than answers. But at least now they had a target, the mine shaft. If they could get there before Vincent moved the children underground, they might have a chance. Back at the motel, Santos was coordinating with a tactical team from the state police. The mine shaft Tyler had described was on private property owned by a shell company that traced back to Vincent Mays. Satellite imagery showed recent construction, new buildings, security fencing, and what looked like living quarters. "It's a compound," Santos said, pointing to the aerial photos. "Designed to be defensible and self-sufficient. If they get underground, we'll never get them out without a siege." "How long do we have?" Clint asked. Tyler said they're moving tonight, so maybe 12 hours. Chad had been studying the photos with the intense focus of someone whose life had depended on understanding his environment. "There's something wrong with this picture." "What do you mean?" "Look at the security setup. Cameras, motion sensors, the fence line. It's all facing outward. Like they're trying to keep people from getting in, not from getting out." Clint saw what his son meant. The compound was designed like a fortress, but not like a prison. The security measures were focused on external threats, not internal control. "Maybe that's because Vincent doesn't need to worry about the children escaping anymore," Santos suggested. "After 7 years, maybe they're too conditioned to run. Or maybe it's not a prison at all," Chad said slowly. "Maybe it's a staging area." "For what?" "Think about it. Vincent spent 7 years teaching me and the other kids about loyalty, about family, about protecting the people you care about. What if he wasn't just trying to control us? What if he was training us?" The implication hit Clint like a physical blow. "You think he's building an army? Kids who've been raised to follow orders, who don't have outside connections, who believe they owe everything to him." Chad's voice was grim. "What better soldiers could you ask for?" Santos grabbed her phone. "I need to contact the task force. If Mays is training child soldiers, this is bigger than just a kidnapping case." But as she made the call, Clint was thinking about Tyler's warning. Someone with serious money and connections was backing Vincent Mays. Someone who wanted Clint dead and had the resources to make it happen. The kidnapping of Chad hadn't been about revenge. It had been about recruitment. 7 years of psychological conditioning to create the perfect weapon against the man who destroyed the Mays trafficking network. And now that weapon was sitting 3 feet away from him, still carrying the psychological programming that Vincent Mays had spent 7 years installing. Chad, Clint said carefully, when Tyler mentioned Vincent's plan for tonight, what did you think? That we need to save Sarah before he hurts her. And how do you think we should do that? I go back. I surrender myself to him and hope that's enough to buy her time for you to find her. It was exactly what Vincent Mays would want him to think. 7 years of conditioning had taught Chad that the solution to every problem was self-sacrifice, that his value lay in protecting others even at the cost of his own freedom. Clint realized that rescuing his son from Vincent Mays was going to require more than just getting him away from the compound. It was going to require undoing 7 years of psychological manipulation, 7 years of training that had turned a kidnapped child into the perfect weapon against his own father. The real battle hadn't even begun yet. Chapter 6, The Trap Within the Trap. By 4 p.m., the tactical team was in position around the mine shaft compound. Satellite surveillance showed movement inside the buildings. At least 15 people, including several children. Thermal imaging confirmed that the underground portions of the facility were occupied, but the depth of the tunnels made it impossible to get an accurate count. We go in at sunset, Santos announced. 2 teams, north and south entrances. Priority is securing the children and taking Vincent Mays alive. But Clint was studying intelligence reports that had arrived from the FBI's organized crime database, and what he was reading made his blood run cold. Detective Santos, he said, I need to speak with you privately. They walked outside the command trailer, far enough from the team to avoid being overheard. The financial backing Tyler mentioned, Clint said, I think I know who it is. He handed her a file folder. Marcus Williamson. Remember that name? Santos flipped through the documents. Real estate developer. Net worth around $50 million. Clean record, respected in the community. She looked up. How does he connect to Mays? His company handled the property purchases for all of Mays' operations, both before and after his prison sentence. But here's the interesting part. Williamson's daughter was one of the victims in the original trafficking case. Victim how? She was trafficked by Mays' organization when she was 16. Died of a drug overdose in a brothel in Chicago while Mays was still running his network. Clint pointed to a photograph in the file. Williamson blamed me for not prosecuting the case fast enough to save her. Santos whistled low. So he's been funding Mays' revenge operation. It gets worse. Williamson has connections throughout state and federal law enforcement. He's donated to police benevolent funds, sponsored community outreach programs, served on oversight committees. Clint met her eyes. If he's been feeding information to Mays, then everything we've planned could be compromised. As if summoned by their conversation, Santos's radio crackled with an urgent message from the surveillance team. Control, this is Overwatch. We've got movement at the compound. Looks like they're evacuating. Through binoculars, they could see vehicles loading up at the compound. Children were being loaded into vans while armed men took defensive positions around the perimeter. They know we're here, Santos said, which means someone told them. The radio crackled again. Control, be advised, we've got incoming vehicles from the east. Multiple cars, moving fast. Clint grabbed the binoculars and focused on the approaching vehicles. Expensive SUVs, government plates, moving in formation like a convoy. That's not backup, he said. That's Williamson. The lead SUV stopped at the compound's main gate, and a man in an expensive suit got out. Even at this distance, Clint recognized Marcus Williamson from his photos. Tall, silver-haired, the kind of man who commanded rooms and bought senators. He's not here to stop Vincent, Clint realized. He's here to make sure the operation succeeds. Santos was already on her radio, calling for immediate backup and air support. But they were 20 minutes away from the nearest state police barracks, and Williamson's convoy suggested he had his own tactical team. We need to move now, Santos said, before they finish evacuating. No, Chad's voice came from behind them. He'd approached silently, moving with the careful stealth that 7 years of captivity had taught him. If we attack now, Sarah dies. Vincent will kill her rather than let her be rescued. So what do you suggest? I go in alone. Offer myself in exchange for her release. Absolutely not, Clint said. Dad, it's the only way. Vincent thinks he has me psychologically broken. He expects me to sacrifice myself for the other kids because that's what he trained me to do. Chad's voice was steady, but his eyes showed the steel that had kept him alive for 7 years. What he doesn't expect is for me to be doing it as part of a plan. What kind of plan? Chad pulled out a small device, a GPS tracker no bigger than a pill. I swallow this before I go in. You track me to wherever they take me. Then you come with everything you've got. The signal won't penetrate underground, Santos objected. It doesn't have to. Vincent's not planning to stay underground forever. He's got bigger plans, remember? The mine shaft is just a temporary stronghold while he prepares for something else. Clint studied his son's face, seeing not the scared 12-year-old who'd been kidnapped, but the determined young man who'd survived 7 years of psychological warfare and emerged with his moral compass intact. There's something else, Chad continued. Vincent's been training me and the other kids for something specific. He calls it the final lesson. I think tonight was always supposed to be the night it happened. What kind of final lesson? He wants to prove that the family he created is stronger than the one nature gave us. He's going to give me a choice, kill you, or watch him kill Sarah. The simplicity of it was breathtaking in its cruelty. Vincent Mays had spent 7 years turning Chad into the perfect weapon, and now he was going to force that weapon to fire at its intended target. And you think you can resist that conditioning? I know I can, because the thing Vincent never understood is that every minute I spent protecting those kids, every night I chose their safety over my escape. I wasn't being conditioned. I was choosing. And tonight, I'm going to choose to end this. Santos was shaking her head. It's too dangerous. If the psychological conditioning is stronger than you think, then my father will be ready for that, Chad said simply. Because that's what good parents do. They protect their children, even from themselves. Clint felt a surge of pride so powerful it nearly brought him to his knees. This young man, his son, had survived 7 years of systematic psychological torture and emerged not as a broken victim or a programmed weapon, but as someone willing to risk everything to save a child he'd learned to love as a sister. Okay, Clint said, but we do this smart. Full backup, multiple contingencies, and the minute something goes wrong, we come in with everything we've got. Chad nodded and swallowed the GPS tracker. Vincent's expecting me to come alone and surrender. Let's not disappoint him. As Chad walked toward the compound, unarmed and apparently defeated, Clint couldn't shake the feeling that they were playing a game whose rules had been written by someone far more dangerous than Vincent Mays. Marcus Williamson had the resources and connections to make people disappear permanently. If this plan failed, none of them would live to see morning. But as he watched his son disappear into the compound, Clint realized that for the first time in 7 years, he felt like a father again. And fathers, he'd learned, were capable of extraordinary things when their children were threatened. Chapter 7. The Sins of the Father. Chad walked through the compound gates with his hands visible and his head held high. Guards searched him thoroughly, but found nothing. The GPS tracker was already working its way through his digestive system, invisible to their detection equipment. Vincent Mays waited in the main building, sitting behind a desk like a corporate executive rather than a kidnapper. He'd aged in the hours since their meeting at the federal building, the stress of executing his long-planned revenge beginning to show in the deep lines around his eyes. You came, Vincent said. I wasn't sure you would. I came for Sarah. Of course you did. Always thinking of others first. It's your greatest strength and your fatal weakness. Vincent stood and walked to a window overlooking the compound. Do you know why I really took you, Chad? To hurt my father. No, that was just a bonus. I took you to prove a point about nature versus nurture. Your father believes that good people are born good, that evil is a choice people make despite their better angels. Vincent turned back to Chad. I wanted to prove that anyone can be shaped into anything with the right pressure applied over enough time. So what did you shape me into? A killer. The word hung in the air between them like a blade. Chad kept his expression neutral, but inside he felt the familiar cold fear that had lived in his chest for 7 years. I don't kill people, don't you? What about Michael Torres? Chad's blood turned to ice. Michael Torres had been one of the older boys at the compound, 18 years old and violent. He'd been hurting the younger children, and when Chad had confronted him, the fight had turned deadly. Chad had been defending 8-year-old Sarah when Torres had pulled a knife, and in the struggle. That was self-defense. Was it murder disguised as protection? Vincent smiled. The beauty of it is that it doesn't matter. You killed a man, Chad. You crossed that line. And once you crossed it once, crossing it again becomes easier. What do you want from me? Vincent walked to another door and opened it. Beyond was a smaller room where Sarah sat in a chair, unharmed but clearly frightened. Standing behind her was Marcus Williamson, impeccably dressed despite the circumstances. Mr. Williamson and I have been discussing your father's future, Vincent said. It seems that Clint Harrison has made quite a few enemies over the years. Prosecutors tend to do that. Williamson spoke for the first time, his voice cultured and calm. Your father cost me my daughter, son. Her name was Morgan, 16 years old, beautiful, full of life. The monsters your father was supposed to be stopping took her from me and destroyed her before I could get her back. So you teamed up with one of those monsters for revenge? I partnered with someone who understood loss. Someone who could give me what the justice system couldn't. Williamson's mask of civility slipped slightly. Closure. Vincent opened a metal case on his desk, revealing a pistol. Here's how this works, Chad. You're going to kill Marcus Williamson. Then you're going to kill me. And then you're going to call your father and tell him to come here alone. And if I refuse, then Sarah dies slowly, and you watch. And then we start bringing in the other children one by one until you agree. Chad looked at the gun, then at Sarah, then at the two men who'd spent years planning this moment. Everything they'd said and done had been leading to this. The final corruption of the kidnapped boy, turning him into the weapon that would destroy his own father. There's just one problem with your plan, Chad said. What's that? You're not the only one who's been planning for 7 years. Chad lunged forward, not toward the gun, but toward the emergency alarm button he'd spotted on Vincent's desk. The alarm began blaring immediately, and emergency lights bathed the room in red. In the chaos that followed, Chad grabbed Sarah and rolled behind the desk for cover. Vincent shouted orders while Williamson drew his own weapon. But the sound of helicopters was already approaching, and tactical teams were breaching the compound perimeter. You think your father can save you? Vincent snarled, pointing his gun at Chad. I'll kill you both before he gets here. No, said a voice from the doorway. You won't. Clint Harrison stood in the entrance with Detective Santos and a team of federal agents. But his attention was focused entirely on his son and the girl he was protecting. Hello, Vincent. Marcus. Clint's voice was calm, professional. You're both under arrest for kidnapping, human trafficking, and conspiracy to commit murder. You have no jurisdiction here, Williamson said. This is a private matter. Actually, it became federal jurisdiction the moment you transported children across state lines. Clint stepped into the room, and it became personal the moment you stole my son. Vincent still held his gun trained on Chad and Sarah. One more step, and they die. No, they don't. Clint's confidence was absolute, because you need Chad alive to complete your revenge. And Sarah is the only leverage you have left. I could kill them both and settle for knowing you have to live with losing them again. You could, but then you'd just be another dead criminal, and I'd be the prosecutor who stopped you. That's not the legacy you want, is it? Vincent's hand wavered slightly. 7 years of planning, 7 years of preparation, and it was all falling apart in minutes. Besides, Clint continued, there's something you don't know. Something that's going to make all of this meaningless. What? Tyler called us. Told us everything. Your nephew has been working with the FBI for 3 months, documenting your operation, recording your conversations. Clint smiled coldly, including the ones where you and Williamson discussed your plans to murder federal officials. Williamson's face went pale. That's impossible. Is it? Tyler's sister died because of your operation. Marcus, did you really think you wouldn't want revenge too? The sound of footsteps in the hallway announced the arrival of more tactical teams. Vincent Mays was surrounded, outgunned, and facing the collapse of everything he'd worked for. "It's over, Vincent," Clint said. "Put down the gun." "No." Vincent's voice was desperate now. "This doesn't end until you understand what I lost. Until you feel what I felt." He turned the gun toward himself. "Don't," Chad said, standing up despite the danger. "Don't give up. Sarah still needs you to fight for her." Vincent looked at the young man he'd spent 7 years trying to break, and for the first time saw not a weapon but a person. Someone who'd survived his worst efforts to destroy him and emerged with his humanity intact. The gun clattered to the floor. As federal agents moved in to secure the scene, Chad helped Sarah to her feet. She was shaken but unharmed, and she immediately wrapped her arms around the young man who'd been her protector for so long. Chad, she whispered. "I knew you'd come back." "I promised I would," he said softly. "And I keep my promises." Clint watched his son comfort the girl who'd become his sister, and realized that Vincent Mays had failed in the most fundamental way possible. He tried to turn Chad into a killer, but instead had created someone capable of love, sacrifice, and moral courage under the worst possible circumstances. The real victory wasn't capturing the criminals. It was discovering that 7 years of systematic abuse hadn't been able to destroy the good man his son had become. Chapter 8: Blood and Redemption. The compound had been secured, but the real work was just beginning. 23 children were found in the underground portions of the facility, some who'd been missing for years, others taken more recently. Each would need medical attention, psychological evaluation, and careful reintegration with families who'd given up hope of ever seeing them again. Clint stood in the main building, watching as Chad helped coordinate the children's evacuation. Despite everything he'd endured, Chad had naturally assumed a leadership role, making sure the younger ones weren't separated from their protectors and that everyone understood they were finally safe. "He's remarkable," Detective Santos said, joining Clint at the window. "Most trauma survivors that age are barely functional, but he's thinking about everyone except himself." "That's how Vincent trained him," Clint said. "But it's also who he is naturally. Some things can't be broken, no matter how hard someone tries." Outside, Vincent Mays was being loaded into a federal transport vehicle. He'd confessed to everything: the kidnapping, the staged accident, the 7 years of psychological manipulation. But he'd also provided information about a larger network of traffickers and corrupt officials that would take years to fully investigate. Marcus Williamson had been less cooperative. Faced with evidence of his financial backing and direct participation in the conspiracy, he demanded a lawyer and refused to say another word. But the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit was already unraveling his business empire, and it was clear that his fall from grace would be spectacular and permanent. "What happens now?" Chad asked, approaching his father. "Now we go home," Clint said, "and we figure out how to be a family again." "What about Sarah?" They both looked at the 12-year-old girl who was staying close to Chad despite the chaos around her. Her biological family had died in the car accident Vincent had described, and she'd been a ward of the state when she'd been trafficked. Technically, she would go back into the foster care system. "We'll figure that out too," Clint said. "If you want her to be part of our family, we'll make it happen." Chad's relief was visible. "She's my sister, not by blood but by choice. I can't lose her now." "You won't have to. The adoption process will be complicated: background checks, home studies, court hearings." But Clint had connections in the family court system, and Sarah's attachment to Chad was obvious to anyone who saw them together. With time and patience, they could become a real family. But first, they had to deal with the aftermath of 7 years of separation. The drive home was quiet. Sarah slept in the back seat while Chad stared out the window at scenery that was familiar but changed. 7 years was a long time in a growing suburb. New shopping centers, new housing developments, new landmarks in a landscape he'd known as a child. "It's different," he said. "A lot of things are different," Clint agreed. "The question is whether that's good or bad. I don't know yet. Ask me in a few months." They stopped at a grocery store to pick up food for dinner. Chad moved through the aisles like someone who'd forgotten that choices existed, overwhelmed by the sheer variety of products. the casual abundance of a free society. Sarah stayed close to his side, equally wide-eyed. 7 years, Chad said, standing in front of the cereal aisle. 7 years of eating whatever they gave us when they gave it to us. And now there are 40 different kinds of cereal. Take your time, Clint said. We're not in a hurry. But as they stood in line at the checkout, Clint noticed the way Chad positioned himself between Sarah and potential threats, the way he cataloged exits and watched other customers for signs of danger. 7 years of captivity had left marks that wouldn't heal quickly. That night, they sat around Clint's kitchen table eating pizza and trying to navigate the awkwardness of being strangers who shared a history. Sarah was slowly coming out of her shell, telling Clint about the books she'd read and the stories Chad had told her. Chad was quieter, still processing the reality of his freedom. What was it like? Clint asked. Really? Not the version you told the police, but the truth. Chad was quiet for a long moment. Confusing. Vincent wasn't evil all the time. He could be kind, protective, almost like a real father. That's what made it so hard to hate him. Stockholm Syndrome. Maybe, but it was more complicated than that. He saved my life more than once when some of his people wanted to kill me. He made sure I got an education. He protected the younger kids from the worst of what happened there. Chad pushed pizza around on his plate. For a long time, I thought maybe he really did care about us. What changed your mind? Sarah, when she got older, started asking questions about why we couldn't leave, why we couldn't call our families. Vincent's answers got harder, more controlling. I realized that his protection came with a price, complete obedience. And you couldn't pay that price. Not when it meant letting Sarah grow up the way I had. She deserved better. After dinner, they tried to watch a movie together, but Chad kept getting distracted by the sounds outside. Cars passing, neighbors talking, the ordinary noises of suburban life that had become foreign to him. Finally, he gave up and went to check the locks on all the doors and windows. It's going to take time, Clint told Sarah as they watched Chad move through the house like a sentry on patrol. He used to do that at the compound too, she said. Check everything twice before he could sleep. Vincent said it was good training, but I think Chad was just scared. Scared of what? That they'd take me away. That's what Vincent used to threaten when Chad got too rebellious, that he'd separate us, send me somewhere worse. Sarah curled up on the couch. Chad never told Vincent, but he had nightmares about it, about failing to protect me. Clint felt the weight of understanding settle on his shoulders. Chad's hypervigilance wasn't just about his own safety. It was about protecting the one person who'd made his captivity bearable. 7 years of being responsible for someone else's welfare had created habits that wouldn't break easily. Later that night, Clint was awakened by sounds from the guest room where Chad was sleeping. Not screams, but the muffled sounds of someone fighting an invisible enemy. When he went to check, he found Chad sitting on the edge of the bed, sweating and shaking. Nightmare. Memory. About the night I killed Michael Torres. Chad wiped his face with the back of his hand. Vincent was right about one thing. Crossing that line changed me. I tell myself it was self-defense, but part of me knows I could have found another way. What other way? I could have let him hurt Sarah and try to get help later. I could have tried to talk him down instead of fighting. You could have let an 18-year-old violent criminal hurt a little girl while you stood by and watched, Clint interrupted. Is that really what you think you should have done? No, but I also shouldn't have enjoyed it as much as I did. The admission hung in the air between them. Clint realized that this was the real damage Vincent Mays had done. Not just the kidnapping or the psychological manipulation, but the corruption of his son's self-image. Chad had been forced to become violent to protect others, and now he carried the guilt of discovering that he was capable of violence at all. Chad, listen to me. You spent 7 years in an impossible situation, making impossible choices. The fact that you feel guilty about surviving shows that you're still the good person you always were. What if Vincent was right? What if I'm becoming what he tried to make me? Then you'll fight it. Every day, for the rest of your life, you'll choose to be better than what he tried to make you. That's what good people do. They fight the darkness, especially the darkness inside themselves. Chad looked at his father with something that might have been hope. Do you really think I can do that? I know you can, because you've been doing it for 7 years already. Chapter 9, The New Beginning. 6 months later, the Harrison family had settled into something resembling normal life. The adoption of Sarah had been finalized, making official what had already been true in their hearts. She was family now, chosen and beloved. Chad had started college at the local community college, studying criminal justice with a focus on victim advocacy. He'd struggled initially with the social aspects, making friends, dating, the casual interactions that most people took for granted. But slowly, carefully, he was building a life that belonged to him. The nightmares still came sometimes, but less frequently. Therapy helped, and time helped more. Most importantly, having a purpose helped. Chad had begun volunteering with organizations that worked with trafficking victims, using his experience to help other survivors navigate their recovery. Clint had taken a leave of absence from the prosecutor's office to focus on his family. After 7 years of believing he'd lost everything that mattered, he wasn't taking any chances with this second opportunity. The federal building felt less important than soccer games and homework help and the 1,000 small moments that made up a family's daily life. But on this particular evening, as they sat around the dinner table discussing Sarah's upcoming school play and Chad's plans for summer break, Clint's phone rang with news that would change everything again. "It's Detective Santos," he said, answering the call. He listened for several minutes, his expression growing increasingly grim. "What is it?" Chad asked when he hung up. "Vincent Mays escaped from federal custody during a medical transport this morning. They found 2 guards dead and the transport vehicle abandoned." The words hit the family like a physical blow. After 6 months of slowly learning to feel safe, the threat was back. "He's coming for us," Sarah said quietly. "We don't know that," Clint said, but his mind was already working through possibilities. Mays had been facing life in prison without parole. His only motivation for escaping would be to finish what he'd started. "Yes, we do," Chad said. This was always his backup plan. If the legal system failed him, he'd take matters into his own hands. Clint's phone rang again. This time, it was an unknown number. "Answer it," Chad said. "He wants to talk." Clint put the phone on speaker. "Hello, Clint." Vincent Mays' voice was exactly as calm and controlled as it had been 6 months earlier. "I trust you've heard the news." "Vincent, where are you?" "Close enough. I wanted to call and thank you for taking such good care of my children. Sarah looks healthy, and Chad seems to be adjusting well to civilian life." The implication was clear. He was watching them, had been watching them. "What do you want?" "The same thing I've always wanted. Justice. Closure. The satisfaction of knowing that you understand what it feels like to lose everything. You already tried that. It didn't work. Because I was thinking too small. I tried to turn Chad into a weapon against you, but that was never going to work. Chad is too fundamentally decent to be corrupted completely." There was something like pride in Mays' voice. "So I've decided on a different approach, which is, I'm going to kill your family in front of you. Slowly, carefully, and then I'm going to let you live with that knowledge for the rest of your very short life." The line went dead. Chad was already moving, checking windows and doors with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent 7 years learning to think tactically. Sarah had gone pale, but remained calm. She'd learned early that panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. "We need to leave," Chad said. "Now. Tonight. Where can we go that he won't find us?" "Nowhere. But we can make it harder for him, and we can choose the battlefield." Clint realized that his son was right. Running would only delay the inevitable. Vincent Mays had resources, connections, and the kind of focused hatred that could sustain a hunt for years. "What do you have in mind?" "We go back to the compound. It's still sealed as a crime scene, but it's defensible and we know the layout." That's exactly where he'd expect us to go, which is why it might work. Vincent trained me to think tactically, but he also trained me to think like him. I know how he approaches problems, how he plans operations. Chad met his father's eyes, and I know his weaknesses. 2 hours later, they were driving through the night toward the abandoned mine compound. Clint had called Detective Santos and arranged for backup, but it would take time to coordinate a response. For now, they were on their own. The compound looked different in the darkness, more ominous, more isolated. The buildings that had once housed Vincent's operation now stood empty, windows broken and doors hanging open. Crime scene tape fluttered in the wind like prayer flags. "He's already here," Chad said, pointing to fresh tire tracks in the mud. "How do you know?" "Because this is where it has to end. For Vincent, for us, for everyone. He's not going to run anymore, and neither are we." They approached the main building carefully, using the tactical movement patterns Chad had learned during his captivity. Every shadow could hide a threat. Every corner could conceal an ambush. But when they entered the building, they found Vincent Mays sitting behind the same desk where he'd been captured 6 months earlier. He was alone, unarmed, and apparently calm. "You came," he said. "I wasn't sure you would. You didn't give us much choice." "There's always a choice, Clint. That's what I've learned during my months in federal prison. We always have a choice about how our stories end." Chad stepped forward. "So how does your story end, Vincent?" "With redemption, I hope. With the understanding that I was wrong about everything that mattered." He reached into his jacket, and Clint tensed. But instead of a weapon, Vincent pulled out a letter. "This is from Tyler, my nephew. He's been writing to me in prison, trying to help me understand what I'd become." Vincent's voice broke slightly. "He told me about his sister, about how she really died. It wasn't your fault, Clint. It wasn't even my fault, really. She died because the world is broken and sometimes good people get caught in the wreckage." "Vincent, let me finish. I spent 7 years training Chad to be a killer, but I failed. Do you know why? Because you and Amelia had already trained him to be something better. To be compassionate, protective, decent. All those years of trying to break him, and I never even made a dent in who he really was." Vincent stood up slowly, his hands visible and empty. "I can't undo what I did. I can't give you back the 7 years I stole, or give Chad back his childhood, or give Sarah back her innocence. But I can give you this." He pulled out a second envelope. "Locations of every safe house, every contact, every piece of the network I've built. Everything you need to save the children who are still trapped in situations like the one I created." "Why?" "Because Chad was right. Sarah still needs someone to fight for her. All of those children do. And I'm tired of being the monster in their nightmares." Vincent Mays walked to the window and looked out at the compound where he'd spent 2 years planning his revenge. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I'm asking you to finish what I started. Not the revenge, but the rescue. Use what I've given you to save the others." The sound of helicopters approaching filled the night. Detective Santos's backup had arrived. "You could run," Chad said. "There's still time." "No, there isn't. There never was." Vincent turned back to face the family he'd spent so long trying to destroy. "But you can. You can run towards something better, something worth building instead of tearing down." As federal agents surrounded the building, Vincent Mays sat back down behind his desk and waited for arrest. His face showed not defeat, but something that might have been peace. Later, as they drove home through the pre-dawn darkness, Sarah fell asleep in the back seat. Chad sat in the passenger seat, staring out at the passing landscape. "Do you think he meant it?" Chad asked. "About the redemption?" "I think he meant it. Whether he can achieve it is another question. I hope he can. Not for his sake, but for mine. I need to believe that people can change, that the darkness doesn't have to win." Clint reached over and squeezed his son's shoulder. "The darkness doesn't win, Chad. Not as long as there are people like you willing to fight it." "People like us, you mean?" "Yeah, people like us." The Harrison family drove home as the sun rose on what felt like the first day of the rest of their lives. Behind them, the compound grew smaller in the rearview mirror until it disappeared entirely, taking with it the last shadows of a nightmare that had lasted 7 years. Ahead of them lay the future, uncertain, challenging, but finally, completely their own. Vincent Mays had tried to destroy a family, and instead had helped create a stronger one. His greatest failure had become their greatest victory. The discovery that love, courage, and moral conviction could survive even the most determined attempts to destroy them. The boy who'd been kidnapped at 12 had become a man at 19. Not because of what Vincent Mays had done to him, but in spite of it. And that man would spend the rest of his life protecting others from the kind of monsters who steal children and break families. It was, Clint thought, exactly the kind of justice that couldn't be found in any courtroom. The kind that came not from punishment, but but from the simple act of choosing to build something better from the wreckage of what had been destroyed. The Harrisons were going home. All of them. Finally. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation. Marshall Ramsey stood in his study, examining the quarterly reports from his construction company. 20 years of backbreaking work had built Ramsey Construction into one of the most respected firms in Northern California. At 45, his hands still bore the calluses from his early days swinging hammers, though now those same hands signed million-dollar contracts. The military had taught him discipline, strategy, and most importantly, how to identify threats before they struck. 12 years as a Navy SEAL had honed instincts that served him well in business and life. His wife Tricia often joked that he approached their marriage like a military operation, always 3 steps ahead, always prepared. She had no idea how right she was. Marshall's phone buzzed with a text from his 12-year-old daughter Emma. "Dad, can you pick me up from Sarah's house?" Mom said she had to work late again. The 3rd time this week. Tricia's sudden dedication to her interior design career seemed to coincide with their daughter needing more rides, more help with homework, more of everything that Tricia used to handle effortlessly. As he drove through the affluent neighborhoods toward Emma's friend's house, Marshall reflected on his wife's recent changes. Tricia Carlson had been different when they met 15 years ago. Ambitious but grounded, beautiful but not vain. She'd supported him through the grueling early years of building his business, even working as his bookkeeper when they couldn't afford proper staff. But success had changed her. The designer clothes, the expensive spa treatments, the constant need for validation from her wealthy friends. Marshall had provided everything she wanted, hoping it would bring back the woman he'd fallen in love with. Instead, it seemed to feed an insatiable hunger for more. Emma emerged from the house, her auburn hair catching the late afternoon sun. She had inherited her mother's beauty, but her father's steel-gray eyes and keen intelligence. At 12, she was already showing signs of a strategic thinking that ran in the Ramsey bloodline. "How was school, kiddo?" Marshall asked as she buckled her seatbelt. "Fine. Dad, can I ask you something?" "Always." Emma hesitated, unusually uncertain. If someone was lying to you about something important, would you want to know? Marshall's hands tightened imperceptibly on the steering wheel. "That depends on the situation. But generally, yes. Truth is always better than comfortable lies. Even if it would hurt. Especially then, pain from truth heals. Pain from living a lie just festers." Emma nodded thoughtfully and stared out the window for the rest of the drive. That evening, Marshall returned home to find Tricia in the kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, speaking in hushed tones. She quickly ended the call when she saw him. "Who was that?" he asked casually. "Just Jackie from the design firm. We're working on the Henderson project." Marshall knew Jackie Wall personally. She was married to one of his subcontractors. Jackie was direct, practical, and had never spoken to Tricia in hushed tones about anything. "How's the project coming along?" "Oh, you know how it is. Demanding clients, tight deadlines." Tricia avoided his eyes, busying herself with dinner preparations. Marshall watched his wife move around their kitchen, the kitchen he'd renovated himself as a surprise for their 10th anniversary. Every detail had been perfect, from the custom cabinets to the imported Italian marble countertops. He wanted to give her something beautiful, something that would make her smile every time she walked into the room. Now, she couldn't even look at him. Over dinner, Emma chatted about school while Tricia picked at her food, checking her phone frequently. Marshall made mental notes of every tell, every micro-expression, every deviation from normal behavior. The way she touched her neck when Emma mentioned her college fund. The slight flush when the conversation turned to weekend plans. After Emma went to bed, Marshall found Tricia in their bedroom, applying an expensive night cream he didn't remember buying. "Trish, we need to talk about Emma's college fund." Her hand froze for just a moment before continuing its circular motions. "What about it?" The quarterly statement came today. I'd like to review it with you. Why? You've never been interested in the details before. Because our daughter's future is important to me. I want to make sure we're on track. Tricia set down the cream and turned to face him. Marshall, you worry too much. I handle all our financial planning. Trust me. Trust. The word hung in the air between them like a challenge. I do trust you, he said carefully. That's why I know you won't mind if we look at it together. Fine. Tomorrow. I'm tired tonight. As Tricia settled into bed beside him, Marshall stared at the ceiling, his mind racing. The college fund contained $180,000, money he'd been methodically contributing to since Emma was born. If something had happened to it, he needed to know. But more than that, he needed to know why the woman beside him felt like a stranger. Chapter 2. Cracks in the Facade. The next morning brought answers Marshall wished he'd never sought. The college fund account showed a balance of $23,000. Over the past 8 months, systematic withdrawals had drained nearly everything, all authorized by Tricia's electronic signature. Marshall sat in his truck outside the bank, staring at the printed statements. Each withdrawal was dated and timed. He cross-referenced them with his calendar, his travel schedule, Emma's activities. A pattern emerged that made his blood run cold. Every withdrawal coincided with days when he was out of town on business. Days when Tricia claimed to be working late. Days when Emma needed rides to friends' houses because mom had appointments. His phone rang. Glenn McBride, his business partner and oldest friend. Marsh, you sitting down? What is it, Glenn? I just got a call from Alex Riley. You know him, right? That real estate agent Tricia's been working with on the Henderson project. Marshall's grip tightened on the phone. What about him? He wants to meet with you. Says it's about a business opportunity, but something feels off. Guy seemed nervous as hell. Alex Riley. Marshall knew the name, but had never met the man. Tricia had mentioned him several times over the past few months, always in the context of work, always casually, always with just a little too much enthusiasm in her voice. Set up the meeting, Marshall said. This afternoon, if possible. You sure? I got a weird vibe from this guy. I'm sure. Marshall spent the drive to his office planning his approach. In the military, intelligence gathering was about patience, observation, and letting the enemy reveal their weaknesses. Alex Riley was about to become an unwitting informant. The meeting took place at a downtown restaurant, neutral ground that Alex had suggested. Marshall arrived early, choosing a table that gave him clear sight lines and an unobstructed exit. Old habits died hard. Alex Riley was exactly what Marshall expected. Late 30s, perfectly styled hair, expensive suit that screamed successful but not quite wealthy. The kind of man who drove a leased BMW and lived in a trendy apartment he couldn't really afford. Mr. Ramsey, thanks for meeting with me. Alex's handshake was firm, but his palm was sweaty. I've heard great things about your company. From Tricia, a flicker of something, surprise, fear, crossed Alex's face. Among others, your reputation in the industry speaks for itself. They ordered drinks and made small talk about the local construction market. Alex was smooth, practiced, but Marshall detected the tells of a man under pressure. The way he touched his collar when lying. The slight delay before answering direct questions. The fake smile that never reached his eyes. So what's this business opportunity? Marshall asked. I have a client looking to develop a luxury housing project. 50 units, high-end finishes, beautiful location in the hills. The kind of project that could be very profitable for the right contractor. What's the budget? $12 million, give or take. Marshall leaned back in his chair. That's a significant project. Why not go with one of the bigger firms? Morrison Construction, Davies Brothers? The client specifically requested you. Said your attention to detail was exactly what they were looking for. And this client is... Alex hesitated. They prefer to remain anonymous until we have preliminary agreements in place. Marshall nodded as if this made perfect sense, while every instinct screamed that Alex was lying. No serious developer stayed anonymous at this stage. No real project worth $12 million started with vague meetings in restaurants. But he played along, asking technical questions, discussing timelines, watching Alex fumble through answers about engineering requirements and permit processes. The man knew just enough to sound credible to someone who didn't understand construction. "I'll need to see the site," Marshall said finally. "Of course. I can arrange that for early next week." As they prepared to leave, Marshall's phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Dad, Mom's working late again. Can you pick me up from Jessica's?" "Sorry," Marshall said to Alex. "Parental duties call." "No problem. I understand. Beautiful family, by the way. Trisha's show me pictures." The comment landed like a physical blow. Marshall kept his expression neutral, but inside, a cold fury began to build. "She's shown you pictures?" "Just the one of your daughter's school play. Trisha was so proud. Said Emma wants to be an actress." Emma had never expressed any interest in acting. The school play Alex mentioned had been 2 years ago, and there was only one photo from that event, a picture that sat on Trisha's desk in their home office. Marshall drove toward Jessica's house, his mind racing. Alex Riley wasn't just some real estate agent Trisha worked with professionally. He'd been in their home. He'd seen personal photos. He knew details about their family that no business associate should know. Emma climbed into the truck with an unusually serious expression. "Dad, we need to talk." "What's wrong, kiddo?" "Remember what I asked yesterday? About whether you'd want to know if someone was lying to you." Marshall pulled over to the side of the road and turned to face his daughter. "Emma, what's going on?" She reached into her backpack and pulled out a small digital recorder, the kind she used for school projects. "I've been recording things. Things I thought you should know about." "What kind of things?" "Mom's phone calls. The ones she makes when she thinks I'm not listening." Emma's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. "Dad, she's been talking to a man named Alex. A lot. And it's not about work." Marshall felt the world shift beneath him. His 12-year-old daughter had been conducting surveillance on her own mother. "Emma, why didn't you come to me sooner?" "I wasn't sure at first. I knew something was wrong, but I thought maybe I was imagining it. Then last week, I heard her tell him that she loved him." The words hit Marshall like a sniper's bullet, precise, devastating, final. But along with the pain came something else, pride. His daughter had the instincts of a natural intelligence operative. She'd identified a threat, gathered evidence, and reported her findings up the chain of command. "Do you want to hear it?" Emma asked quietly. Marshall looked at his daughter, really looked at her. She was 12 years old, but her eyes held an understanding far beyond her years. She'd already lost her innocence, already learned that the people you trust most could betray you without hesitation. "Yes," he said. "I want to hear it." Chapter 3. Intelligence Gathered. That evening, after Trisha left for another late client meeting, Marshall and Emma sat in his study with the door locked. The digital recorder sat on his desk like a piece of evidence in a court case. Emma had been methodical in her surveillance. Over 3 weeks, she'd recorded 17 phone conversations, 12 text message readings, and 4 in-person conversations she'd overheard from her bedroom. The first recording was devastating enough. "Alex, I can't keep doing this. Marshall's getting suspicious. Baby, we talked about this. You said you were ready to leave him." "I am, but it's complicated. There's Emma to think about and the business. The money will cover everything. We can start fresh in Colorado. I already found us a place." Marshall paused the recording. "Colorado?" Emma nodded grimly. "There's more." The subsequent recordings painted a picture of systematic deception that went far beyond simple adultery. Trisha and Alex had been planning to drain the college fund completely, sell Emma's trust fund bonds, which required Marshall's signature, and disappear together. But the most damning recording came from just 3 days ago. "Marshall will never sign the trust fund papers willingly. So we make him. You know his weaknesses. The man would do anything for Emma. What are you suggesting?" "Nothing dramatic. Just leverage. A little accident, maybe. Something that makes him realize how dangerous his line of work can be." Marshall stopped the recording, his hands clenched into fists. They weren't just planning to steal from him. They were discussing ways to threaten Emma's safety to manipulate him. "Dad!" Emma's voice was small. "Are you okay?" Marshall looked at his daughter, seeing not the child he'd been protecting, but a young woman who'd already proven herself more loyal and brave than her own mother. "Emma, I need you to listen carefully. What you've done here, the recording, the investigation, it took real courage. but I need you to promise me something. Anything. From now on, this stays between us. No one else can know about these recordings. Not your mother, not your friends, nobody. Can you do that? Yes, sir. The military response came naturally to her, and Marshall felt a surge of pride mixed with sadness. His daughter shouldn't have to be a soldier in a war she didn't start. There's something else, Emma said hesitantly. I saw Mom packing a suitcase yesterday. She hid it in the back of her closet, behind her winter coats. Marshall's mind immediately shifted into tactical mode. Tricia was preparing to run, which meant the timeline had accelerated. Whatever they were planning, it was imminent. Emma, I need you to act completely normal around your mother. Can you do that? No matter what happens over the next few weeks, I need you to pretend everything is fine. What are you going to do? Marshall considered his words carefully. Emma deserved honesty, but she was still 12 years old. I'm going to handle this situation. But first, I need to make sure you're safe. That night, after Emma went to bed, Marshall made 3 phone calls. The first was to his brother Omar Graves, a private investigator who specialized in corporate security. Omar had followed Marshall into the military, but stayed stateside, eventually parlaying his skills into a successful investigation business. I need a full background check on Alex Riley, real estate agent, downtown office. And I need surveillance on my wife. Professional grade, not amateur hour. Jesus, Marsh. What's going on? I'll fill you in tomorrow. How fast can you move on this? Give me 48 hours for the background, 12 hours to set up surveillance. The second call was to his lawyer, Nicholas Gilbert, who handled both business and personal matters for the Ramsey family. Nick, hypothetically, if someone forged my signature to access Emma's trust fund, what would be the legal ramifications? Fraud, identity theft, potentially grand theft, depending on the amounts. We're talking federal charges. Marshall, why? Just covering all my bases. I'll be in touch. The third call was to Glenn McBride. That meeting with Alex Riley? Set up another one. Tell him I'm interested in moving forward with the project, but I want to see the site first. Make it happen fast. Marsh, what the hell is going on? I'll explain later. Right now, I need you to trust me and do exactly what I ask. As Marshall lay in bed beside his sleeping wife, he felt the familiar calm that came before action. In the SEALs, this was the moment when planning transitioned to execution, when all the intelligence, preparation, and strategic thinking crystallized into decisive action. Tricia shifted beside him, murmuring something in her sleep. He studied her profile in the dim light, trying to remember when he'd first noticed the changes. The new jewelry she claimed was costume, but looked expensive. The sudden interest in fitness that required a gym membership across town. The gradual emotional distance that he'd attributed to stress from her business. All of it made sense now. His phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at the screen, expecting a message from Omar or Glenn. Instead, it was from an unknown number. I know about the recordings. We need to talk. Tomorrow. Alone. Or Emma pays the price. Marshall's blood turned to ice. He looked at Tricia, still apparently asleep beside him. Then he quietly made his way to Emma's room, checking the locks on her windows, ensuring the security system was armed. Someone had just made the gravest mistake of their life. They'd threatened his daughter. Chapter 4. The Art of War. Marshall didn't sleep. Instead, he spent the pre-dawn hours in his study, planning 3 different operational scenarios while monitoring Emma's room through the security cameras he'd installed years ago. At 5:30 a.m., his phone rang. Omar, I've got preliminary information on your boy Alex Riley. Want the good news or the bad news first? Bad news. He's not just a real estate agent. Guy's got a history of targeting wealthy married women. 3 different cities over the past 10 years. Always the same pattern. Affair, financial manipulation, disappearance. And the good news? He's sloppy. Left a paper trail in Portland that suggests he's got gambling debts to some very unfriendly people. The kind who break kneecaps for late payments. Marshall processed this information. How much does he owe? Close to 200 grand, based on what I can piece together. That's probably why he's pushing the timeline with your wife. Speaking of which, did you get surveillance set up? Vans parked 3 blocks from your house with clear sight lines. My guy Tommy's got military experience. He knows how to stay invisible. At 7 a.m., Marshall watched Tricia go through her morning routine, every movement now loaded with new meaning. She was careful not to wake him, tiptoeing around the bedroom as she gathered clothes for what she claimed was a client site visit. Emma appeared in the kitchen just as Tricia was leaving. "Mom, can you drive me to school today?" Emma asked innocently. "Sorry, honey. I have an early appointment. Your dad can take you." Marshall emerged from the hallway. "No problem. Ready in 10 minutes, kiddo." Tricia kissed his cheek, a gesture that felt like a betrayal in itself, and headed for the garage. Marshall waited until he heard her car pull away before turning to Emma. "Did you get the text I forwarded you last night?" Emma nodded grimly. She'd already proven herself capable of handling adult situations, and Marshall had decided to treat her as the operational asset she'd become. "I want you to stay with your Uncle Omar today. Call in sick to school." "Dad, I'm not running away from this." "You're not running. You're being strategically repositioned while I handle the immediate threat." He handed her a prepaid cell phone. "This is for emergencies only. If anything happens, you call this number." He showed her Omar's contact information. "If Omar doesn't answer, you call 911. What about you?" "I'm going to have a conversation with Alex Riley." 20 minutes later, Marshall dropped Emma at Omar's downtown office, a converted warehouse that served as headquarters for Graves investigations. Omar met them at the entrance, his familiar bulk reassuring in the morning light. "She's safer here than anywhere else," Omar said, reading Marshall's expression. "Tommy's watching the house, Jake's on your wife, and I got 2 guys ready to move if things go sideways." Marshall clasped his brother's shoulder. "Thanks. Just don't do anything that'll put you in prison." Emma needs at least one parent who's not a sociopath. At 10 a.m., Marshall walked into Alex Riley's downtown office, a glass-fronted space in a trendy complex that screamed expensive but not profitable. The receptionist, a young woman with perfect teeth and dead eyes, directed him to Alex's private office. Alex was on the phone when Marshall entered, gesturing dramatically while discussing market projections and investment opportunities. He motioned for Marshall to sit while he finished the call. Marshall remained standing. When Alex finally hung up, his smile was as fake as everything else about him. "Marshall, great to see you again. Ready to look at that development site?" "Actually, I want to discuss something else first." Marshall placed a printed screenshot of a text message on the desk. "This came from your phone last night." Alex's face went pale as he read his own thread about Emma. I don't know what this is. It's a text message you sent to my phone at 11:47 p.m., threatening my daughter's safety if I didn't meet with you alone." "Marshall, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding is that you thought you could threaten my family and walk away from it." Marshall's voice remained calm, conversational. "See, Alex, I know about the affair. I know about the college fund. I know about your gambling debts and your history of targeting wealthy women." Alex stood abruptly, moving toward the door. Marshall's hand shot out, gripping Alex's wrist with just enough pressure to make his point clear. "Sit down." Alex sat. "Here's what's going to happen," Marshall continued. "You're going to call Tricia and tell her the plan has changed. Tell her you need to leave town immediately. Gambling debts, dangerous people, whatever story you want to use. But you're going alone. And if I don't..." Marshall smiled for the first time since entering the office. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "Alex, I spent 12 years as a Navy SEAL. I know 47 different ways to kill a man with my bare hands, and about half of them look like accidents." Alex's breathing became shallow. "You're threatening me." "No, I'm explaining your options. Option 1. You disappear from my family's life permanently, and I let you deal with your gambling debts however you see fit. Option 2. I make sure your creditors know exactly where to find you, along with detailed information about your financial situation and current location. You can't. Option 3, Marshall continued as if Alex hadn't spoken, is that I decide you're an ongoing threat to my daughter's safety, and I handle threats permanently." The color drained completely from Alex's face. "What's it going to be?" Alex's hands shook as he reached for his phone. I'll call her. I'll tell her I have to leave." Speakerphone. Alex dialed Tricia's number with trembling fingers. Marshall listened as his wife's voice filled the office, full of concern and affection for the man who'd helped her betray their family. Alex, what's wrong? You sound upset. Trisha, I have to leave. Tonight, some people from Portland found me, and if I don't get out of town... What people? Alex, you're scaring me. The ones I owe money to. They're not the kind of people who negotiate. There was a long pause. What about our plans? What about Colorado? I can't take you with me. It's too dangerous. Maybe in a few months, when things cool down. Marshall could hear Trisha crying through the phone. The sound should have moved him. This was still the woman he'd loved for 15 years. Instead, he felt only cold satisfaction. I love you, Trisha whispered. I love you too, Alex replied, his eyes fixed on Marshall's face. But I have to go. After the call ended, Marshall stood. You have 6 hours to be out of the state. If I see you again, if you contact my wife again, if I even hear your name mentioned in this town, I will end you. Do we understand each other? Alex nodded frantically. Oh, and Alex, the money you took from my daughter's college fund. You're going to return every penny. I don't have it. I already paid most of it to my creditors. Marshall leaned across the desk, his face inches from Alex's. Then you better figure out how to get it back. Because if Emma's college fund isn't fully restored by the end of the week, those gambling debts will be the least of your problems. As Marshall walked out of the office, he felt the familiar rush of a mission accomplished. Phase 1 was complete. Now it was time to deal with his wife. Chapter 5, The Reckoning. Marshall returned home to find Trisha sitting at their kitchen table, still in her work clothes, staring at her phone with tears streaming down her face. She looked up as he entered, and for a moment, he saw a glimpse of the woman he'd married. Vulnerable, lost, genuinely devastated. Then he remembered the recordings Emma had made, and his sympathy hardened into tactical assessment. Rough day at work? He asked, hanging up his keys. Trisha wiped her eyes. Alex had to leave town suddenly. Some kind of family emergency. The lie came so easily that Marshall wondered how many others he'd missed over the years. How many client meetings and work emergencies had actually been something else entirely. That's unfortunate. I hope everything works out for him. Marshall, can we talk? I mean, really talk. Marshall sat across from her at the table where they'd shared thousands of meals, where Emma had done homework, where they'd planned their life together. What's on your mind? I think we need to consider some changes in our marriage. Marshall kept his expression neutral. What kind of changes? I've been thinking about what I want out of life. What makes me happy? And I don't think this, she gestured around the kitchen, is working anymore. This being our marriage? Marshall, we're different people than we were 15 years ago. We want different things. Maybe it would be better if we took some time apart. The conversation felt surreal. His wife was asking for separation while sitting in the kitchen he'd built for her, surrounded by the life he'd worked 18-hour days to provide, apparently oblivious to the fact that he knew about her affair. What about Emma? She's resilient. Kids adapt. And it's not like we'd be fighting or anything. We could handle this maturely, like adults. Marshall studied Trisha's face, noting the micro-expressions that revealed her true emotional state. The slight elevation of her left eyebrow when she mentioned Emma, a tell that indicated she was lying about something important. The way she touched her wedding ring while talking about separation, a subconscious gesture suggesting guilt. Have you thought about counseling first? Trying to work through whatever problems we're having. Trisha's pause lasted just a beat too long. I don't think counseling would help. Some things can't be fixed, Marshall, such as, we don't connect anymore. When was the last time we really talked? Really shared something meaningful? The irony was devastating. They were having the most meaningful conversation of their marriage, and she had no idea. You're right, Marshall said finally. We should separate. Surprise flashed across Trisha's face. Apparently she'd expected more resistance. Really, if that's what you want, then yes. I won't force you to stay in a marriage that makes you unhappy. What about the house? And Emma's custody? Marshall had spent hours that morning with Nicholas Gilbert, mapping out the legal landscape. We'll work out the details. I assume you'll want to move out fairly quickly. Actually, I was thinking maybe you could stay somewhere else for a while, just until we figure things out permanently. Of course, she wanted him out of the house so she could continue her deception more easily. probably hoping Alex would change his mind about leaving town once the coast was clear. That worked for me. I could stay at Glenn's place for a few weeks. Relief flooded Trisha's features. Thank you for being so understanding about this. I know it can't be easy. Marshall stood and moved to the window, watching a neighbor walk their dog in the fading afternoon light. Trisha, can I ask you something? Of course. In all the years we've been married, have you ever felt like I didn't support your dreams? Like I held you back somehow? The question caught her off guard. No, Marshall, you've always been supportive. This isn't about anything you did wrong. Then what is it about? A long pause. Sometimes people just grow apart. It's nobody's fault. Marshall turned back to face her. You're right. Sometimes they do. That evening, after Trisha left for what she claimed was a dinner with girlfriends, Marshall packed a suitcase. But instead of going to Glenn's house, he drove to a downtown hotel where Omar had reserved a suite under a false name. Emma was waiting for him in the sitting area, homework spread across the coffee table. How did it go with Alex? She asked without looking up from her math problems. Alex won't be bothering us anymore. And Mom, she asked for separation. Emma's pencil stopped moving. Are you going to give her one? Marshall sat beside his daughter on the couch. Emma, I want you to know that none of this is your fault. And no matter what happens between your mother and me, that will never change how much I love you. I know that, Dad, but that's not what I asked. Marshall smiled despite the circumstances. His daughter's directness was refreshing after hours of Trisha's manipulation and Alex's lies. Yes, I'm going to give her a separation. In fact, I'm going to give her exactly what she wants. Emma looked up from her homework. Why do I get the feeling that's not good news for Mom? Because you're smart enough to understand that sometimes getting what you want isn't the same as getting what you need. Over the next 3 days, Marshall orchestrated his apparent departure from the family home with military precision. He made a show of moving clothes and personal items to Glenn's house, complained to mutual friends about Trisha's sudden desire for space, and played the role of the confused, hurt husband perfectly. Meanwhile, Omar's surveillance team documented every move Trisha made. She contacted Alex 17 times in the first 2 days, growing increasingly frantic when he didn't respond. She drove past his office building 4 times. She even called the hospital to ask if anyone named Alex Riley had been admitted. On the 3rd day, she did something that confirmed Marshall's worst suspicions about her character. She went to Emma's school and checked her out early, claiming a family emergency. Then she drove to the bank. Omar's man Tommy followed them inside and watched from a distance as Trisha attempted to access Emma's trust fund. The account required 2 signatures, Marshall's and Trisha's, but Tommy observed her practicing Marshall's signature on a piece of scrap paper. She was planning to forge his name. Tommy's earpiece crackled with Omar's voice. She's going to try it. Get pictures of everything. But Emma, sitting beside her mother at the bank manager's desk, spoke up in a clear, carrying voice. Mom, didn't Dad say we needed to wait until he got back from his business trip before we did anything with my college money? The bank manager looked confused. I thought you said your husband was aware of this transaction, Mrs. Ramsey. Trisha's face flushed. He is. Emma's just confused about the timeline. Actually, Emma continued innocently, I'm pretty sure Dad said not to touch my trust fund without him being here. Maybe we should wait. The bank manager was now clearly uncomfortable. Mrs. Ramsey, given the amount involved and the requirement for dual signatures, I think it would be best if your husband were present for this transaction. Trisha gathered her purse with barely controlled frustration. Fine. We'll come back when he's available. As they left the bank, Tommy captured audio of Trisha angrily scolding Emma in the parking lot. Why did you say that? I'm your mother. You're supposed to trust me. Emma's response was barely audible, but devastating. Maybe if you told the truth more often, it would be easier to trust you. That evening, Marshall received Omar's full report along with photos and audio recordings. His 12-year-old daughter had single-handedly prevented a felony from being committed, while simultaneously exposing her mother's true intentions for the world to see. As he reviewed the evidence, Marshall felt a cold satisfaction settle in his chest. Trisha had made her choice. She'd chosen betrayal over loyalty, deception over honesty, selfishness over family. Now, she was going to learn the price of that choice. It was time for Phase 2. Chapter 6. The Trap is Set. Marshall spent the weekend at Omar's warehouse, planning the next phase of his operation with the precision of a military campaign. The space served as an informal war room, with surveillance photos, financial documents, and legal papers spread across a large conference table. "She's getting desperate," Omar reported, pointing to time-stamped photographs. Since Alex disappeared, she's been driving past his apartment complex twice a day. Yesterday, she tried to get his forwarding address from the building manager. What about the college fund? According to Nick Gilbert, she's called the bank 3 times asking about expediting the signature process for Emma's account. They keep telling her both parents need to be present. Marshall studied a photograph of Tricia sitting in her car outside Alex's apartment building, phone pressed to her ear with an expression of barely controlled panic. She's going to make a mistake soon. Desperate people always do. Emma looked up from her laptop, where she'd been working on what appeared to be homework, but was actually helping Omar compile a digital dossier on Alex Riley's previous victims. "Dad, I found something interesting." She turned the screen toward him. Alex Riley isn't his real name. His birth name is Alexander Reed. And look at this. She pulled up a newspaper article from Portland. 2 years ago, a woman named Susan Martinez accused him of stealing $50,000 from her late husband's estate. The charges were dropped when she suddenly stopped cooperating with police. "Probably paid her off or threatened her," Omar muttered. "Or both," Marshall added. "What else did you find?" Emma navigated to another browser tab. 6 months before that, he was involved in a civil suit with Rebecca Chun in Seattle. Same pattern. Older, wealthy woman, mysterious financial losses. Case dismissed when the plaintiff withdrew her complaint. Marshall felt a surge of pride watching his daughter work. Emma had inherited his analytical mind and attention to detail, but she'd also developed an intuitive understanding of human nature that went beyond her years. "There's something else," Emma continued. "I cross-referenced the dates of Alex's previous relocations with Mom's credit card statements from the past year." She pulled up a spreadsheet that showed a timeline of Tricia's spending patterns. "Look at this. Last February, right after Alex supposedly moved here from Portland, Mom started getting cash advances on her credit cards. Small amounts at first, but they've been increasing." Omar leaned over to examine the data. "She's been giving him money." "How much?" Marshall asked. Emma clicked to a summary tab. $43,000 over the past 10 months. All cash advances, all from different ATMs around the city. The picture was becoming clearer. Alex had identified Tricia as a mark, cultivated the relationship over months, slowly extracted money through the affair, and then escalated to targeting Emma's college fund when Tricia's available credit ran out. "Dad," Emma said quietly, "there's something else. I checked Mom's browser history on the home computer." Marshall waited. "She's been researching divorce law, specifically how assets are divided in California, and what rights she'd have to my trust fund if you died." The words hit Marshall like a physical blow. "What do you mean if I died?" Emma pulled up a series of screenshots. She's been visiting websites about life insurance policies, accidental death benefits, and something called wrongful death settlements. She spent 3 hours last week reading about workplace accidents in the construction industry. Omar and Marshall exchanged glances. The conversation Alex and Tricia had recorded about creating leverage through a little accident suddenly took on a much more sinister meaning. "Emma, I want you to print all of this and give it to Nick Gilbert. This is evidence of conspiracy." "Already done. I also made backup copies and store them in 3 different cloud accounts." Marshall looked at his daughter with a mixture of awe and sadness. At 12 years old, she was already thinking like a seasoned intelligence operative, protecting evidence and covering operational security. But she should have been worried about middle school drama and homework, not her mother's potential involvement in a murder plot. "There's one more thing," Emma said hesitantly. "I don't think Mom knows that Alex is really gone. I think she thinks he's just hiding from the gambling people, and that he'll come back for her eventually." "Why do you say that?" "Because she's still acting like someone who has a future plan. She's not acting like someone whose boyfriend just abandoned her. She's acting like someone who's waiting." Marshall considered this. Emma was right. Tricia's behavior suggested she believed Alex would return, which meant she didn't understand that Marshall had discovered their affair and driven Alex away permanently. That gives us an advantage, Marshall said finally. She'll keep following the original plan, thinking Alex is going to reappear at some point. What was the original plan? Omar asked. Marshall pulled out transcripts of the phone conversations Emma had recorded. Based on the recordings, they were planning to drain Emma's trust fund, stage some kind of accident that would make me more cooperative, and then disappear together to Colorado. Jesus. And she thinks this is still happening. As far as she knows, Alex just had to leave town temporarily because of gambling debts. She's probably expecting him to contact her any day with new instructions. Emma closed her laptop. So what do we do? Marshall stood and walked to the window overlooking the city. Below, people were going about their normal lives, working, shopping, spending time with families they could trust. The contrast with his own situation was almost overwhelming. We're going to give her exactly what she wants, he said finally. We're going to let her think the plan is working. Ow! Marshall turned back to face them. Emma, how would you feel about going on a camping trip with your old man? Somewhere remote, somewhere cell phone reception might be spotty. Understanding dawned in Emma's eyes. You want her to think something happened to you. Not something fatal, but something that would explain why I'm not available to sign bank documents or ask inconvenient questions. Omar grinned. A hunting accident, maybe? Something that lands you in a hospital outside the area? Exactly. And while I'm supposedly unconscious in some remote medical facility, Trisha will have the opportunity to show us exactly how far she's willing to go to get what she wants. Emma was quiet for a long moment. Dad, what if she tries to do something to me while you're gone? Marshall knelt beside his daughter's chair. Emma, I would never put you in real danger. Omar's going to be watching you every second, and we'll have backup plans for every possible scenario. But more importantly, I don't think she'll hurt you. You're worth more to her alive than dead. You're the key to the trust fund. Besides, Omar added, your mom doesn't know that you're aware of what's going on. As far as she's concerned, you're still just a 12-year-old kid who doesn't understand adult problems. Emma smiled for the first time in days. She has no idea how much trouble she's in, does she? Marshall returned his daughter's smile. None whatsoever. As they finalized the details of their plan, Marshall felt the familiar calm that came before decisive action. Trisha had made her choice when she betrayed their family. Alex had made his choice when he threatened Emma's safety. Now, they were going to learn that Marshall Ramsey was not a man who forgave betrayal. And he never forgot. Chapter 7. Into the Woods. Monday morning arrived with the crisp clarity of autumn in Northern California. Marshall made his final preparations while Trisha went through her morning routine, unaware that her husband was orchestrating the endgame of their marriage. Emma played her part perfectly at breakfast, chattering about school projects and weekend plans while secretly coordinating with Omar through hand signals they practiced. She'd proven herself remarkably adaptable to operational requirements, a skill that would serve her well in the coming days. Dad, can we go camping this weekend? Emma asked as Trisha gathered her purse and work materials. I haven't been to the mountains in forever. That sounds like a great idea, Marshall replied. It's been too long since we had some father-daughter time. Trisha looked up from her phone. Camping? This weekend, just overnight. There's a site up near Lake Tahoe that Emma's been wanting to see. It seems kind of sudden. Marshall shrugged. We both need a break from all the stress lately. Some time in nature might do us good. Emma nodded enthusiastically. Please, Mom. We'll be back Sunday evening. Trisha's expression was conflicted. On one hand, having Marshall and Emma out of town would give her more freedom to contact Alex or handle financial matters. On the other hand, the timing felt coincidental given her recent bank visit. I suppose it would be good for you two to spend time together, she said finally. After Trisha left for work, Marshall made a phone call to Nicholas Gilbert. Nick, I need you to do something for me. Call Trisha this afternoon and tell her you need to meet about updating my life insurance policy. Make it sound routine, but mention that the payout has increased substantially since my business has grown. Marshall, what are you planning? Just reinforcing some information she might find interesting. Can you do it? Yeah, but I'm getting worried about where this is all heading. Trust me, Nick. Everything I'm doing is completely legal. That wasn't entirely true, But Nick didn't need to know about the more aggressive aspects of Marshall's plan. At 3 p.m., Marshall and Emma loaded camping gear in his truck, while Omar's surveillance team documented every move from their concealed positions. To any observer, they looked like a father and daughter heading out for a weekend adventure. The reality was significantly more complex. They drove north toward the mountains, but instead of heading to Lake Tahoe, Marshall took a series of back roads that led to an abandoned mining camp Omar had scouted earlier. The location was perfect, remote enough to be believable, but close enough to civilization for rapid extraction if needed. Once they reached the camp, Marshall set up their legitimate camping equipment, while Emma established communication protocols with Omar using satellite phones that couldn't be traced through normal cellular networks. Phase 1 begins at 1800 hours, Marshall said, checking his watch. That gives Trisha time to get home and start wondering why we're not answering our phones. At exactly 6 p.m., Emma placed a call to Trisha's cell phone using a prepaid phone that couldn't be traced to either of them. "Mom? It's Emma. Something happened." Trisha's voice was immediately panicked. "Emma, what's wrong? Where are you?" "We're at the camping site, but Dad had an accident. He was setting up our tent near this cliff, and some rocks gave way." "Oh my God, is he hurt?" Emma's performance was Oscar-worthy. Her voice shook with exactly the right amount of fear and uncertainty. "He fell about 15 feet. He's unconscious, and I can't wake him up. There's blood. Emma, call 911 right now." "I tried, but my phone doesn't have any signal up here. I had to hike to a high spot just to call you." "Where exactly are you?" "I'll call for help." Emma provided coordinates that would lead search teams to the abandoned mining camp, where they would find evidence of an accident, but no actual victims. "Mom, I'm scared. Dad's breathing, but he won't wake up, and I don't know what to do." "Baby, listen to me. I'm going to call 911 and the sheriff's department. They'll send a helicopter to get you both. Just stay with your father and keep him warm, okay?" "Okay. But Mom, what if?" "Don't think like that. Your father is strong. He's going to be fine." After Emma ended the call, Marshall felt a complex mix of emotions. Trisha's panic and concern had sounded genuine, and for a moment, he wondered if he'd misjudged the depth of her betrayal. Then Emma showed him a text message that had arrived on her regular phone during the call. It was from Trisha, sent just 3 minutes after their conversation ended. "Emergency at home. Can't pick you up today. Take the bus." "Mom." The text was intended for Alex, sent to the number she'd been using to contact him for months. Even in the midst of a family crisis, Trisha's first instinct was to reach out to her lover. Marshall's momentary doubt evaporated. 20 minutes later, Emma's satellite phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Omar. "Mountain rescue deployed. Sheriff's helicopter en route to coordinates." Trisha left house immediately after your call, heading toward bank. The trap was working perfectly. While search and rescue teams combed the mountains looking for victims who weren't there, Trisha was racing around town trying to access funds that would soon be frozen by court order. Nick Gilbert had already filed emergency paperwork citing suspicious financial activity and potential fraud, but the legal wheels wouldn't start turning until morning. That gave Trisha exactly one night to reveal her true intentions. At 10 p.m., Emma's regular phone received another call from Trisha. "Emma? Thank God. I've been calling for hours. Are you okay? Where's your father?" Emma's voice was perfectly calibrated to convey exhaustion and trauma. "They airlifted Dad to a hospital in Carson City. The doctors won't tell me anything because I'm not 18. I'm driving there right now." "What hospital?" Emma provided the name of a medical facility that Omar had confirmed would have no record of Marshall's admission. "Mom, they said Dad has a serious head injury. They don't know when he'll wake up." "Oh, baby, I'm so sorry. This is all my fault for letting you go on this trip." "It's not your fault, Mom. It was just an accident." "Emma, listen carefully. I need you to come home with me tonight. We'll drive back to the hospital together in the morning." "But what if Dad wakes up and I'm not here?" "The doctors will call us. Right now, you need rest and a proper meal. You've been through enough." Emma agreed to meet Trisha at the hospital, knowing that Omar's team would intercept them before any actual contact occurred. But the conversation had provided crucial intelligence about Trisha's state of mind. She wasn't rushing to her husband's bedside out of love and concern. She was consolidating assets and preparing for the next phase of her plan. As Marshall and Emma settled into their remote camp for the night, both of them listening to regular updates from Omar's surveillance team, Marshall reflected on how completely his life had changed in just 1 week. 7 days ago, he'd been a successful businessman with a loving family and a bright future. Tonight, he was a man hiding in the wilderness, gathering evidence of his wife's betrayal while his 12-year-old daughter demonstrated tactical skills that would impress seasoned operators. But he felt no regret about the path he'd chosen. Trisha had started this war when she decided to betray their family. Now she was going to discover that Marshall Ramsey always finished what others started, and he never lost. Chapter 8. The Net Closes. Tuesday morning brought news that confirmed Marshall's worst suspicions about his wife's character. Omar's voice crackled through the satellite phone at 6 a.m. "You're not going to believe what she did last night." Marshall and Emma were already breaking camp, preparing for the next phase of their operation. They'd slept in shifts, monitoring communications and ensuring their fictional scenario remained believable to outside observers. "Tell me, after she couldn't find you at the Carson City Hospital, she drove straight home and started packing. Not just clothes, everything valuable. Jewelry, artwork, important documents. Then she made 3 phone calls." Marshall felt his jaw tighten. To who? First call was to a storage facility, reserving a unit under a false name. Second call was to that lawyer Jackie Wall recommended last month, the one who specializes in emergency asset protection. Third call. Omar paused. Third call was to a private medical transport service, asking about the cost of moving an unconscious patient from Carson City to a more specialized facility. Emma looked up from her satellite phone, where she'd been monitoring news reports about the search and rescue operation. She's planning to move Dad somewhere she can control access to him. That's not the worst part, Omar continued. After the phone calls, she drove to 3 different ATMs and maxed out cash advances on every credit card she has access to. Then she went to that 24-hour check cashing place on 5th Street. Marshall's blood ran cold. What was she cashing? That's what Tommy's trying to figure out. But based on the amount of time she spent inside, it wasn't just one check. The implications were staggering. In the span of 12 hours, Trisha had gone from concerned wife to someone systematically liquidating assets and making arrangements to potentially move her unconscious husband to a location where she could control medical decisions. "Omar, I need you to contact Nick Gilbert immediately. Tell him to file for emergency conservatorship and to freeze all joint accounts. Do it now before the banks open." "Already on it." Nick's been at his office since 5 a.m. preparing paperwork. Emma finished packing her gear and looked at her father with an expression far too mature for her 12 years. "Dad, she's not planning to wait for you to wake up, is she?" Marshall considered sugarcoating the truth, but Emma had already proven herself capable of handling adult realities. "No, kiddo, I don't think she is." The satellite phone buzzed with an incoming text from Omar. "Mountain Rescue officially called off search at dawn. Presuming you fell into river, bodies swept downstream. Local news picking up story." Perfect. The fictional accident was now public record, which meant Trisha would have legal justification for any emergency financial decisions she might make. She probably thought she had a narrow window of opportunity before Marshall's body was recovered and death certificates were issued. She had no idea that window was actually a trap. At 9 a.m., Marshall and Emma were hidden in the back of Omar's surveillance van, watching live video feeds from cameras positioned around their house. They watched Trisha return home with 2 men Marshall didn't recognize, both wearing cheap suits and carrying briefcases. "Who are they?" Emma asked. Omar consulted his tablet. "Guy on the left is David Chun, private lawyer who specializes in questionable estate planning. Guy on the right is Marcus Webb, insurance adjuster who's been suspended twice for fraudulent claims processing." Marshall felt his anger crystallize into something cold and sharp. Trisha hadn't just betrayed their marriage. She'd assembled a team of professionals to help her steal Emma's inheritance. They watched as Trisha led the 2 men into Marshall's home office, where they began photographing documents and organizing papers into different stacks. One stack appeared to be insurance policies. Another looked like bank statements and investment records. The third stack was Emma's trust fund documentation. "Dad," Emma said quietly, "are we going to let them take everything?" Marshall's smile was predatory. "Emma, do you remember the first rule of military strategy? Know your enemy better than they know themselves. And the second rule? Never interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake." Emma grinned. "So we're going to let them think they're winning? We're going to let them hang themselves with their own rope." Over the next 6 hours, Omar's surveillance team documented every illegal action taken by Tricia and her associates. They recorded conversations about forging Marshall's signature on insurance documents. They photographed Chun helping Tricia practice Marshall's handwriting. They captured Webb on audio explaining how to maximize payouts from accidental death policies. Most damning of all, they recorded Tricia's phone call to the medical transport service. "I need to arrange immediate transfer of a patient from Carson City General to a private facility. The patient is unconscious, and I have medical power of attorney." She was planning to have Marshall moved to a location where she could control access to him, potentially until she'd completed her financial manipulations. At 3 p.m., the trap was sprung. Nicholas Gilbert arrived at the house with a sheriff's deputy and a court order freezing all Ramsey family assets, pending investigation of suspected fraud. Omar's surveillance footage had provided sufficient evidence for a judge to issue emergency protective measures. Marshall and Emma watched from the van as Tricia's carefully orchestrated plan collapsed in real time. The lawyer Chin attempted to destroy documents, but was stopped by the deputy. Webb tried to leave through the back door, but found his car blocked by another police vehicle. Tricia herself stood in the middle of her kitchen, the kitchen Marshall had renovated as a gift, and screamed at Nick Gilbert about harassment and illegal search procedures. "Mrs. Ramsey," Nick said calmly, "you're welcome to contact your own attorney. But these accounts remain frozen until we can verify the legitimacy of your recent financial activities. My husband is missing, possibly dead. I have every right to protect my family's assets." "Actually, you don't. California law requires a waiting period before death can be legally presumed, and it certainly doesn't authorize forgery or insurance fraud." Tricia's face went white. "I don't know what you're talking about." Nick opened his briefcase and pulled out printed screenshots of the surveillance footage. "Mrs. Ramsey, we have video evidence of you practicing your husband's signature and audio recordings of you discussing fraudulent insurance claims. I strongly recommend you contact a criminal defense attorney." As the sheriff's deputy began reading Tricia her rights, Marshall felt a complex mix of satisfaction and sadness. This was the woman he'd loved for 15 years, the mother of his child, his partner in building a life together. She was also someone who'd been willing to steal from her own daughter and potentially manipulate her husband's medical care for financial gain. Emma touched his arm. "Dad, are you okay?" Marshall looked at his daughter, strong, loyal, intelligent beyond her years, and realized that while he was losing a wife, he was gaining something even more valuable: absolute certainty about who could be trusted. "I'm fine, kiddo. Better than fine, actually. What happens now?" Marshall watched as Tricia was handcuffed and led toward a police car, her carefully constructed plan in ruins around her. Now we finish this. The final phase of Marshall's operation was about to begin, and this time, there would be no escape route for anyone who betrayed his family. Chapter 9. Justice Served. 3 weeks later, Marshall sat in Nicholas Gilbert's office reviewing the final documents that would reshape his family's future. Emma was beside him, no longer the innocent 12-year-old who discovered her mother's betrayal, but a young woman who'd proven herself worthy of his complete trust. "The criminal charges are solid," Nick reported. "Fraud, forgery, attempted grand theft, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. With the evidence Omar collected, Tricia's looking at minimum 5 years, possibly 8 if they can prove the medical transport scheme was intended to facilitate harm." Marshall nodded without emotion. "And the divorce?" "Expedited due to criminal activity. California has provisions for accelerated proceedings when one spouse commits felonies against the family unit. She gets nothing. No alimony, no property division, no custody rights." Emma looked up from her phone, where she'd been tracking the status of Riley's situation. Dad, Alex was arrested in Nevada yesterday. Apparently, those gambling debts caught up with him. Marshall had ensured that information about Alex's location and assets reached the right people at exactly the right time. The two men who'd come looking for Alex were not known for their patience with defaulted loans. What about the money they took? Emma asked. Nick consulted his notes. Alex managed to return about 60% before his unfortunate encounter with his creditors. The rest will come from the sale of Trisha's personal assets, jewelry, car, everything she tried to hide in that storage unit. So Emma's college fund will be fully restored? With interest, actually, the court ordered punitive damages that more than compensate for the emotional distress caused. Marshall felt a deep satisfaction at this news. Emma's future had been the primary target of Trisha's betrayal, and seeing it not just restored but enhanced felt like justice properly served. There's one more thing, Nick added hesitantly. Trisha's lawyer contacted me yesterday. She wants to meet with you. Something about making amends. Absolutely not, Emma said before Marshall could respond. She had her chance to make amends. She chose Alex instead. Marshall studied his daughter's face, seeing the steel that had emerged over the past month. Emma had lost her innocence, but she'd gained something more valuable, the knowledge that she could handle whatever life threw at her. What do you think, kiddo? Should I hear what she has to say? Emma considered this carefully. Dad, you taught me that when someone shows you who they really are, you should believe them. Mom showed us exactly who she is. Meeting with her now just gives her another opportunity to manipulate the situation. Marshall felt a surge of pride. At 12 years old, Emma understood strategic thinking better than most adults. You're right. Nick, tell her lawyer the answer is no. We have nothing to discuss. As they left Nick's office, Emma was unusually quiet. Finally, as they reached Marshall's truck, she spoke. Dad, do you think she ever really loved us? The question hit Marshall harder than any of Trisha's betrayals. I think she loved the idea of us. The security, the lifestyle, the image of being a successful family. But real love, the kind that puts other people before yourself, I don't think she's capable of that. I'm sorry. For what? For recording her phone calls. For spying on my own mother. For helping you trick her. Marshall stopped walking and turned to face his daughter. Emma, look at me. You have nothing to apologize for. What you did wasn't spying, it was protecting your family. You saw a threat, you gathered intelligence, and you reported it to the appropriate authority. That's exactly what you should have done. But she's still my mom. Yes, she is. And that makes what she did even worse, not better. Parents are supposed to protect their children, not steal from them. Emma nodded. But Marshall could see she was still struggling with the complex emotions of having helped bring down her own mother. Kiddo, let me ask you something. If you had to do it all over again, knowing what you know now, would you change anything? Emma thought for a long moment. No, I do exactly the same thing. Because protecting you and protecting my future was more important than protecting her lies. Marshall felt his chest tighten with emotion. His daughter had faced an impossible choice and made the right decision, even though it cost her the comfortable illusion of a happy family. I'm proud of you, he said simply, as they drove home to the house that was now truly theirs, free from deception and betrayal. Emma asked one final question. Dad, what if she gets out of prison and tries to contact me? Marshall's expression hardened. That won't happen. How can you be sure? Because part of her plea agreement includes a permanent restraining order. She's legally prohibited from contacting either of us for the rest of her life. If she tries, she goes back to prison. And Alex won't be bothering anyone for a very long time. His creditors were thorough in their collection efforts. Emma didn't ask for details, and Marshall didn't offer them. Some aspects of justice were better left unexamined. That evening, as Emma worked on homework at the kitchen table and Marshall prepared dinner, the house felt peaceful in a way it hadn't in months. The constant undercurrent of tension and deception was gone, replaced by the comfortable quiet of two people who trusted each other completely. Dad, Emma said without looking up from her math problems. Yeah, I know this has been hard for you. Losing Mom, I mean. Are you going to be okay? Marshall smiled as he watched his daughter, brilliant, loyal, strong, bent over her homework in the kitchen he'd built for a woman who'd never deserved it. Emma, I didn't lose anything important. I found out what was really valuable, which is you, your trust, your loyalty, your courage. Everything else was just illusion. Emma looked up and smiled. So what do we do now? Marshall considered the question. They had their house, their business, their future secured. They had each other tested and proven. They had justice properly served. Most importantly, they had the knowledge that they'd faced betrayal and emerged stronger. Now we live our lives, Marshall said. We build something real, something honest, something that can't be destroyed by other people's selfishness. Just the two of us. For now. But Emma, someday you'll find people worthy of your trust. Real friends, maybe even someone special. And when you do, you'll know how to recognize the difference between genuine loyalty and pretty lies. Emma nodded and returned to her homework. Marshall finished preparing dinner.